The world before the creation of the heavens and the earth was a boundless sea. In the midst of this great sea rose the island of Santnar. This island was the embodiment of the true blessing of the goddess who ruled over these lands. It was a place where beauty and grace were in the air, permeating everywhere. In that world, like a bright star, a city sparkled, which was saturated with luxury and pleasure. However, even in such a place there was a downside. A kind of garbage pit where all the dirt was poured. Kimura slums. And the reality there was completely different. Here, base instincts and the struggle for survival prevailed. Cursing and the sound of blows could be heard in the dark alley. Several men detained the boy, who desperately resisted and tried to escape. The man with the dark mustache leaned toward the little criminal. Calling the boy by the name Abel, he assumed that he was simply pretending to be mute. The child looked out from under his cap, hatred and despair. The main one who had detained the boy grabbed the collar of his tattered shirt. The old fabric couldn't withstand the strain and cracked, revealing a neat female breast. Thus, the rumors were confirmed that the scoundrel was a woman. More precisely, a young girl with a very attractive body. But the face was disgusting. Obscene glances immediately turned to the desperately resisting teenager. Despair and fear did their job. A fragment of a bottle with sharp, deadly edges flashed in a thin hand. With one hand, the girl held the torn edge of her shirt, and with the other she waved a broken bottle. In despair, she screamed at her offenders to get away. A rough hand squeezed her shoulder hard. The mustachioed man growled in the unfortunate woman's face, calling her an ungrateful creature. After all, he had shown kindness by taking her into his care. The weak child could barely support herself by just cleaning shoes all that time. New insults rained down, accompanied by blows to the face and cuffs all over the body. The enraged man hissed that he was giving her a week's time. During this period, she had to pay for her patronage by returning all her debts. Otherwise, you will have to deal not with shoes and fists but with rude men. The next few days, the girl was desperately wondering where to get money and what to do next. All that came to mind was cleaning shoes. But you can't earn much with such a craft. Often the shoeshine girl worked in the Piazza San Salina. After all, there you could meet rich customers. They could take pity and give you a coin on top of the fee. This was the case this time. Two young men were sitting on a bench having a lively conversation. One of them was holding today's newspaper, Vestnik Santnar. The one holding the newspaper was complaining to his friend that there were less than 2 days left, and he had absolutely no idea what to do. A girl dressed as a boy polished a stranger's expensive shoes until they shone. All her thoughts were about one thing: money. After all, if she doesn't settle accounts with the patron saint of cleaners, there's only one way out. She'll be sent to a brothel. A terrible fate, it would have been better to die. From her place at the rich gentleman's feet, the shabby girl could see the expensive outfit. The gold-embroidered collar shone in the rays of the sun. Meanwhile, the Lord was thinking about taking Lucretia by the hand and leading her into the ceremonial hall. The thought alone was unbearable. Suddenly, the shoe-shine girl's gaze involuntarily fell on the front page of the newspaper in the gentleman's hands. From the photograph on the spread, the very man who was sitting right in front of her was looking out. The shoe brush almost slipped out of my hands in surprise. My eyes refused to believe what I saw. The man was none other than Cesare Buonaparte himself, the brightest star of the nobility and the hero of countless love scandals. There was talk that Cesare had finally met his destiny, which turned out to be the youngest daughter of the Della Valle family, Lucrezia. The public's attention was drawn to this union. The girl chose as her husband the only heir of Bonaparte. In the distant past, these two influential families made a marriage contract. The entire beau monde congratulated Lucretia on the fact that her long-standing, unrequited love had finally borne fruit. The young man crumpled the newspaper with force. He was beside himself with rage and accused his fiancée of lying. He knew in advance that she was a notorious intriguer. No one paid any attention to the girl dressed in men's clothing. The cap pulled low hid the beads of sweat that appeared on her face. It was impossible to even imagine that one would meet such an important person in the Piazza San Salina. Suddenly, a swarm of thoughts began to swirl in the commoner's head. If she explained her difficult situation, perhaps the master would take pity and throw in a few gold coins. The two friends, leisurely lighting cigars, continued their conversation. They mentioned some crazy plan, that the best idea was to find a decent girl and sell her to Della Valle. The shoeshine girl perked up, because this wasn't just a chance to sort things out with a few gold coins. This was the last chance, given to her by the goddess herself. Not expecting such courage from herself, she cried out, Sell me, promising to become the most expensive lady in Santnar. The cigar almost fell out of the young man's hands in surprise. The friends asked almost simultaneously what this shabby woman was talking about. After all, their professional specialty should be the ability to determine people's class by their shoes. It was obvious that the rich gentleman was mocking the common miss. But she interrupted Mr. Cesare, saying that she had identified everything correctly, and immediately introduced herself. Out of habit, she gave her male name, Abel, and then Adele Vivi corrected herself. The girl insisted that she could play the role the master needed better than anyone else. The young man's eyes showed distrust. After all, someone like this shabby girl could not understand the plans of the heir of the Bonaparte family. However, the cleaner understood that he needed a false daughter of the Bonaparte family, who could be sent to the Della Valle family in his place. The gentleman was shocked, and did not understand from whom this person could hear such a thing. However, the girl assured that she had come to this conclusion after reading the newspaper, and she continued to say that in the marriage contract made public by Della Valle only 2 wealthy families figure. However, no specific names were given, and also concluded that the Lord wants to free himself from a political marriage, to try to deceive everyone by buying a girl and calling her the secret daughter of the Bonaparte family. And for these purposes, a girl is absolutely necessary, since there is still one unmarried son left in the Della Valle family. The other rich gentleman laughed. He was surprised that the girl had guessed everything just by reading the newspaper. It was incredible. But Signor Cesare did not share his friend's joy. It was a futile undertaking. After all, great scientists have come from the Della Valle family since time immemorial, and these are not the kind of people to whom you can simply send a shoeshine girl who can barely read. The girl started speaking a foreign language. She claimed that she had much more skills than just reading. Both friends were extremely surprised. After all, she spoke the Melon language. They were also informed about her knowledge of the Algisa language. Young people vied with each other to ask how someone like her could learn foreign languages, but she only assured that she had read books in the public library and had briefly listened to the speeches of foreigners. It was impossible to believe their ears. It felt like the sea goddess herself was playing a joke on them. In conclusion, the gentleman turned to Adele Vivi, saying that not only the content but also the wrapper is important. After all, the product must look perfect. And both gentlemen walked away with an important air, and the shoe-cleaning lady remained kneeling, surrounded by her brushes. The only chance was floating away like a ghost. In desperation, the girl called out to the important gentleman. Turning around, they saw a completely different person at the shoeshine stand. The cap was gone, and the face was clean of dirt. Instead of a young man with a cap pulled down over his eyes, a pretty black-haired girl was looking at them. Her gaze was bold and attractive at the same time. Her long, tousled hair framed her sweet young face. For a few seconds, Signor Cesare hesitated. After all, this little girl had offered to pretend to be his sister. But after thinking about it, he finally agreed. The color of the hair and eyes of both were quite similar, simply an ideal representative of the Bonaparte family. Then the gentleman began to question the girl about her origin, family, and parents. But Adele Vivi was an orphan and knew absolutely nothing about her father and mother. The young man thought about it. He was overcome with curiosity about why an ordinary fool needed all this. After all, if the deception was revealed, she would simply be killed. But the girl looked the Lord straight in the eye and very openly admitted that she was simply hungry. Life is not sweet for an orphan. It was then that the final decision was made, sending now at the appointed hour to meet at the same place. And then something incredible happened. The frumpy one continued his words with a phrase from Dante's play, "Where we desired each other." It seemed she would really be useful to the family. Without wasting any time, a meeting was arranged for the following day at noon at the Bonaparte estate. It poured rain all night, as if the elements had decided to remind the commoner of the hard life in the slums. But the sounds of thunder did not frighten. They only brought back the events of the previous day more vividly. I still could not believe what had happened. Cesare Buonaparte himself accepted her offer. The issue with the cleaner's patron was resolved by itself. There was no longer any need to worry about the brothel. However, it was all worth keeping secret. Even his only friend Clarice could not be told the secret. But it was still worth warning. As always, she was busy this evening. It was possible to leave a note in the little room where the girls lived. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door of the hut. At such a late hour, there could only be one person, old Nino, the patron saint of cleaners. The unfortunate girl was gripped by fear. She seemed to have even stopped breathing from horror. The door swung open from the blows. The heavy-set silhouette of her boss became clearly visible in the dark opening. He was terribly furious. His dark mustache bristled with anger. It was not for nothing that he came to check whether the debtor had run away. Grabbing the girl's hand painfully, he tried to drag the orphan out of the little room. The boor's obscene thoughts were clearly visible on his distorted face. With a force that came from nowhere, the girl hit the hated man in the face. The man's tenacious fingers involuntarily unclenched. The girl jumped onto the table by the window. The bony hand of the boor almost grabbed the runaway's wide trouser leg. Curses and abuse were heard behind her. But fear did not allow her to stop for a second. After all, if what Signor Cesare had planned were to come to light, she would not live anyway. Better such a death than the shame of a rapist in a dirty hovel. Pushing off with all her might, the unfortunate woman jumped out of the wide-open window, straight into the darkness of the night under the pouring rain. If it was possible, she was ready to risk her life for a normal future. Exactly at noon the next day, Adele stood hesitantly at the gate of a rich mansion. A man in a black suit and bow tie bowed in greeting. He was the butler at the Bonaparte estate named Ernst. Having invited the stunned girl to come in, he said that the head of the family was already waiting in his office. The light from the high windows illuminated the rich furnishings of the office. Signor Cesare sat at the table, sorting through papers. The shabby woman seemed out of place in such a rich place. Her clothes were worn and not entirely clean. The gentleman looked up at the woman who had entered. Smiling, he noted that she didn't look very good. Her clothes were soaking wet and her body was shaking like a leaf in the wind. He asked to share with his older brother what happened to his younger sister. Bursting into tears, the girl told her story. About Mr. Nino, who was the patron saint of all shoeshiners in Camorra. About persecution for late payment for patronage, and for threats to give the girl to a brothel. The gentleman closed his eyes and dryly reported that the old man from the slums was dead. Adele couldn't believe what she heard. She couldn't utter a single word, and her whole body felt like it was on fire. Meanwhile, the man continued to say that it rained heavily all night, and one of the shacks gave in and collapsed. Accidental deaths are quite common in Camorra. Squinting slyly, he asked if there was even one more bug that could interfere with the matter. The girl, wiping away her tears, assured that there was no one else. She did not want to mention her friend. The señor smiled and assured them that there was nothing to worry about, but only until the moment when their plan could go wrong. Now it was necessary to move on to the main thing. The goal known to her was to seduce the son of the Della Valle family and marry him. But you have to start with her body and mind, the way she speaks and carries herself, and finish with the tips of her fingers and toes. That is, to become the ideal representative of the Bonaparte family. To fool the entire Fornati high society. Lighting a cigar, the gentleman continued that there was only 3 months to do everything. But if within that time she doesn't become the lady he recognizes, the plan will go to waste. Tears welled up in her eyes again and she held her breath. After all, if the plan failed, then she herself would go to the trash heap after her. Cesare put out his cigar and asked the girl if she knew why the 3-month deadline had been set. The clever commoner suggested that the event was planned to coincide with the date of the reception, in honor of the birthday of the heir of the Cesare family. The gentleman was again amazed. This girl clearly had a talent for uncovering his plans, relying only on newspaper articles. There was a feeling that she knew even more about Signor Cesare's family than the representative of the Buonaparte family himself. Suddenly the man lifted the girl's chin and looked intently into her amber eyes. Perhaps there was another reason, and this scoundrel was interested in him. It was clear that for a country bumpkin from the slums, who only had a pretty face, a rich gentleman seemed like a messiah. And the newly acquired brother could be the one she wanted to cling to. But the man clearly warned that he did not want to see her one night in his bedroom. The girl protestingly opened her mouth to shout a denial in his face, but she held back. She only quietly whispered that she was grateful for the advice, but the gentleman was of no interest to her at all. And emboldened, she added that such a handsome man as he was a little crazy. The gentleman burst into laughter. That expression, both beautiful and evil, suited her so well. But then, in the most serious tone, he warned that such cases had already happened in his life. Adele assured her master that she understood everything, but he corrected her by saying that he was now the older brother, and that was exactly how he should be called. Having difficulty pronouncing the word brother, I received an encouraging sister in response. Seated in a soft armchair, the newly made brother continued to instruct his relative. Her name was now Adelaide Bonaparte, 5 years younger than her brother. All this time she lived in distant Kapalo somewhere overseas, considering herself a commoner. And suddenly, for some unknown reason, she decided to come to Santnar alone. The girl tried not to miss the slightest detail, so she had to adapt to the situation. That was the idea. But there was another member of the Buonaparte family, Cesare's grandmother. Eva Buonaparte held the high post of president of the Signoria, that is, she was the head of parliament. Without the consent of this powerful lady, it was impossible to even begin the planned project. But the man assured that there was no point in involving Mrs. Eva in this matter. After all, she wanted grandchildren more than anything in the world, and she was ready to accept Lucretia with open arms. And therefore she supported this marriage with all her heart. Cesare lit his cigar and asked with pain in his voice if the girl had asked all the questions. After all, the most important one, about the gentleman's parents, had not been asked. And for a family member it is important to know even the smallest details. But she did not ask about it. The girl looked down because there wasn't a single person in Santana who didn't know this sad story. There were rumors that Cesare's parents were mad with love for each other. The couple ran away hand in hand, abandoning their powerful families and their young child. No more news came of the two. All this happened in the year when young Cesare was barely 9 years old. There was nothing to add. No further clarification was required on this issue. At the end of his lesson, the young man suggested telling everyone that Adelaide was the youngest daughter of love-struck parents. The memories tormented my soul painfully, so I had to end the conversation. The man headed towards the door and, turning around, said dryly that the maid was waiting for her mistress. The girl didn't notice at all how the evening twilight made everything around her gray. Only a bright light from another hall was shining through. The man's silhouette in the doorway was magnificent. His white cambric shirt emphasized his broad shoulders and narrow waist. Stopping in the doorway, Cesare smiled and expressed hope that his next meeting would be with a lady. He was looking forward to it. He hoped that the student would quickly learn the lessons of social life. Adele froze. She didn't believe everything that was happening to her. She only quietly said that she would do her best. Her assigned maid was already waiting outside the door. She introduced herself as Effie Corer, and it was a great honor for her to serve Lady Adelaide. A long corridor led to a huge hall, striking in its beauty. The marble floor reflected the rich decoration of the room. Antique furniture emphasized the exquisite taste of the owners. The maid said that this room now belonged to a lady, and she complained that the Bonapartes rejected luxury, so the decor could not be called chic. Rather comfortable, although I thought that the furnishings were too modest for a young lady's chambers. Adele couldn't believe her eyes. It was something she had never dreamed of. The room looked like a fairy tale palace. And she also had a maid who informed her that etiquette classes would begin tomorrow, and the young lady should not have a cold under any circumstances. After all, wet, dirty clothes could easily provoke this problem. Therefore, it is urgent to take a bath. And she pointed to a huge steaming bathtub with rose petals on the surface of the water. For a simple girl from the slums, it was impossible for anyone to help her. After all, it was not every day that she was able to wash herself with clean water in her hovel. But the maid was adamant. She insisted that this was part of the training. And in fact, Effie's assistant's words were not a request. The well-worn shirt slid to the floor. The girl bashfully covered her neat chest. Her entire body was covered in bruises. Some of them were already fading and had a yellowish tint. Others were clearly fresh with burgundy bruises. The assistant looked at the trembling, thin body with horror. But the girl lifted her chin and said that the bruises would quickly disappear. After all, she knew this from experience, because she often received punches and beatings. And then there would be no traces left. Suddenly, panic gripped her whole body. Most likely, the maid would report this to the master and he would break the contract, considering her body ugly. But she assured that the contract would end only after the young lady's wedding with Della Valle's son. Until then, all that was needed was to keep the secret and not be discovered by the young master of that clan. A sigh of relief escaped her lips, and the girl gave praise to the goddess of the sea. Until then, she needs to focus on restoring her health and bringing her emaciated body back to normal. After all, she is now Lady Bonaparte. In the reflection of the water, a thin girl with huge amber eyes and lush dark hair looked at her. Almost a child, but with the features of a young beauty. In the office, in front of Mr. Cesare, who was sitting in a chair, a maid was reporting on how things were going. That the young lady's health leaves much to be desired. with numerous bruises and beatings and unnatural thinness. He couldn't believe everything he heard. After all, a chipped pearl is worthless. The whole plan was falling apart before his eyes. However, Effie's maid assured that there was no reason to panic. With proper treatment, the bruises would disappear without a trace. And when the lady gained a little weight, her beauty would outshine many. Cesare thought about these words, because even now the girl was beautiful. And it was a bit of a pity that they were now relatives, and he assured her that he had no intention of touching her. But an evil voice in his head reminded him that the victim would die as soon as the problem was solved. The window overlooked the facade of a luxurious mansion, as well as part of the port. It was early morning and the sun was just about to rise over the horizon. Adele woke up early in the morning, as was her habit, and immediately saw a line of ships entering the port. They had been working all night and were now returning with a rich catch. Soon some fishermen will start distributing the fish they didn't sell to anyone in need in the harbor. Many times the girl also wandered along the pier early in the morning in the hope of catching the distribution. After all, the most frequent feeling in her joyless life was hunger. And also humiliation. Now, standing at the window in these luxurious rooms, she could not believe what was happening. After all, just a few days ago, her world was the bottom of the Camorra slums. But then doubts crept in as to whether there would be enough strength and skill to cope with everything planned. It would have been impossible to fall asleep anyway, and Adele took a book from the shelf to distract herself from her obsessive thoughts. The maid found her doing this. Entering the room, she made sure that the lady was awake. She immediately asked if the bedroom was not suitable for rest, or the bed was not soft enough, but the girl assured that she was used to waking up early, and in a voice full of enthusiasm, she asked about plans for today. The assistant noted that from today on there would not be a single free hour in their schedule, and they had to start with a meal. The young lady put on a blue velvet dress embroidered with lace and combed her thick hair properly, and she was completely ready to begin her studies. In the dining room, a huge table was set for breakfast with many different utensils, coasters, and napkins. The embroidered tablecloth was snow white. The maid pulled out a chair, inviting the student to sit down. The lesson began with finding out the culinary preferences of the student, but the ward, embarrassed, replied that she had never even thought about it. The only thing she didn't really like was rotten food. But in general, anything would do. The absence of preferences was a good quality for a noble lady, Madame thought. And she added that table etiquette was one of the obligatory skills for nobles. It was the foundation of foundations. In front of the confused girl there was an innumerable number of plates, forks, and knives of different shapes and sizes. The teacher taught that it was necessary to use the outermost utensils when starting a meal. It was necessary to maintain posture, raise the chin. Elbows should not touch the tabletop. The strict lady praised the student. She said that it was turning out quite well. Now she was offered to try the first course. Adele's head was spinning. She had never seen such a variety of food and drink in her life. The mind-blowing smells were not even worth mentioning. The exquisite names followed one another. Beef carpaccio with arugula, linguine with mackerel and abalone, halibut with potato gratin and tomato sauce. Every dish was simply superb. Suddenly, the pleasure turned to fear. Suddenly, she was eating too greedily like some kind of slum tramp. But the assistant praised her appetite. She said that for some time it was necessary to eat 4 times a day. After all, a noble lady should be in shape. Now a tour of the mansion was in store. The library, reception room, art gallery, billiard room were shown. Each room caused the girl genuine delight. In the central area of the first floor was the master's office, and if a lady needed to visit it, she had to enter without knocking. That was the rule of the mansion. Adele was dizzy from everything that was happening. However, she wondered if there was anything to be wary of. Well, the maid decided to report it right away. The circle of people who knew about the contract between the young lady and the young master numbered 6 people, including Effie herself. However, in a few days another person will be added. This will be the etiquette teacher, Madame Flavia. She is somewhat strict but has the best competence. It was necessary to listen to her without fail. The girl was a little confused. She didn't even know how to greet Madame. However, the maid came to the rescue. In Fornati, it was necessary to greet like this. Holding the skirt, you had to bend your knees, keep your back straight. At the same time, you had to bow your head. The student immediately performed a welcoming curtsy. It turned out quite well. She grasped everything on the fly. In the young lady's private chambers, The evening twilight cast a soft blue light over everything. The atmosphere itself was conducive to a restful sleep. Looking into the bedroom, the teacher wished good night to her student. She responded in kind, wishing for the protection of the goddess of the sea. The girl was left alone in her luxurious bed, and she couldn't calm the thoughts swarming in her head. Just a couple of days ago, only screams and noise were Kimora's constant companions. Now, a ringing silence guarded her peace. It turns out that there was a world where it was so calm and good, where you could eat hot food and sleep in silence. And for some, it was commonplace. Someone was calling her name, screaming for the girl to run away. The black foam around her seemed to choke her. Fear paralyzed her body. Adele opened her eyes. The sudden screams brought her out of her sleep. It turned out that someone was really calling her name loudly. It was the maid Effany. Her face was worried and her whole appearance said that something bad had happened, and she was called by the name of Madame Flavia. She unexpectedly arrived at the mansion for a visit. Time was running out. Something urgently needed to be thrown over the shoulders. The maid hurried the sleepy girl, and at the same time she hastily told who was the cause of such a commotion. For several generations, the Bonaparte family was served by representatives of the noble ancient Laurent family, but Flavia Laurendon's name was the loudest in social circles. She was known for being like a work of art, thanks to her beauty and elegance. Also on everyone's lips was the obstinate nature and excessive strictness in the training of young ladies. This is exactly what the middle-aged lady who flew into the bedroom demonstrated. She was wearing a wide hat and a suit with a strict collar. A cane with a knob gleamed in her hands. In a commanding voice, she asked what kind of inappropriate appearance the young shameless lady had. Adele was embarrassed. She could only mumble words of apology. But her justification speech was immediately interrupted. After all, no one allowed this impudent girl to speak. Absolute ignorance of manners and rules. The strict lady was beside herself with anger. It was this girl who had to be taught at least something. The girl stood, holding her hastily thrown-on robe with her hand. Her head was lowered. They did not allow her to say anything. But help came in the form of a young gentleman who appeared at the bedroom door. He cooled the ardor of the strict teacher with just one phrase. If the young lady had known etiquette, there would have been no need for a professional's help. The man crossed his arms over his chest. He added that he had not expected Madame Flavia so early. The newcomer's face instantly changed beyond recognition. Politely removing her hat, Madame headed towards Mr. Cesare. At the same time, she was trying to say something, but he only demonstratively kissed the dear guest on the cheek, although she tried to move away. But the signor immediately asked if Madame Flavia had slept well on the road at night. According to the rules of good manners, one could not openly demonstrate one's feelings. The teacher tried to babble appropriate answers, but the signor confused her with the following phrase. He invited me to join him for breakfast, but then he noticed that the entire schedule of classes was scheduled down to the minute. At the same time, he smiled charmingly. Madame's cheeks turned pink with slight embarrassment. After all, the techniques that made girls give their hearts to Signor Cesare had been demonstrated. Then the ladies' man casually remarked that perhaps the guest was planning to take a bath. In that case, he was forced to leave. The teacher choked with indignation. The gentleman should not have said such careless words. After all, that impudent woman could have heard them and come up with stupid things. These words drove Adele crazy. It would be nice to know the position of the impudent woman herself, and only then reason. The gentleman stood up for the girl. Smiling, he assured her that she would not say anything, and this slightly hurt the male ego. The lady was furious. In a loud voice, she declared that the girl should not dare to raise her head. Her eyes were throwing sparks, and the heel of her elegant shoes hit the floor. Coming closer, the imperious lady saw the ugly traces of bruises on the girl's body. In the light of the morning sun, they were especially visible, but she assured me that the bruises would go away. This had happened many times. There would be no marks left on the body. The gentleman seriously noted that this misunderstanding would not be an obstacle to a clearly developed plan. But Madame Flavia did not calm down. In a disdainful tone, she assured that this scoundrel was not suitable for the job. After all, it was still unknown where such a woman could hang out. She sold her body. She could be beaten, leaving scars on her body. People like her are lazy and have no inner core. Even in 100 years, it is impossible to teach them anything. And this particular person simply wants to raise her status using her body. It seemed as if the ground had slipped from under the poor girl's feet. The insults and grievances from everyone who was even slightly higher in status than her came to mind. And that was everyone. But suddenly the words seemed to escape her lips. She apologized and said that she understood her incompetence, but she would do her best to teach. The lady turned around and hissed in the unfortunate woman's face that no matter how hard you try, it's impossible to hide your origin. You can't fool the eyes of those who were born and raised in high society. She asked how one could have acquired arrogance while vegetating at the bottom, but the impudent girl did not give up. Yes, the girl grew up without parents and did not receive a decent education. However, her brother believed that she had the power to cope and deceive everyone. That is why she is here. So let Madame speak to Signor Cesare personally, since she believes that he was mistaken in his judgments. These were very bold words. Even more, Adele was embarrassed and immediately apologized. However, the powerful lady could not cope with her raging emotions. She hit the mirror floor with her cane and began shouting insults. Cesare was still standing in the doorway, silently observing everything that was happening. However, he cleared his throat and interrupted the furious Madame's tirade. She came to her senses instantly. Embarrassed, she stammered that she had completely forgotten about the appointed meeting, and quickly left. The gentleman approached, a toothy smile shining on his face. He said in a joking tone that his sister, it turns out, is no slouch. Feelings overwhelmed me, and thoughts flashed with incredible speed. Having thanked the gentleman for his help, I was immediately afraid that he would see bruises on my fair skin. But the man noted that Madame Flavia had a tough character, and the young lady should have been more meek. Then everything would have gone more smoothly. Adele lifted her chin. Was he trying to say that she should have pretended to be pathetic? However, the man cynically noted that there was no need to pretend. The scruffy girl's entire life had been miserable, so this was already an unchangeable fact. And he suggested considering everything that happened as a performance, where each scene had its own consequences. There was such pain in the girl's eyes, as if the whole world had collapsed. Of course, these cruel words were true, but suddenly the thought flashed through my mind that what had happened was a provocation. Just to see the reaction. It would take all her strength not to show her pain. She certainly wasn't going to become a court jester. The gentleman cast an arrogant glance at the girl and quickly left the room. Only the edge of his gold-embroidered jacket flashed in the field of vision of his lowered amber eyes. The young gentleman very quickly lost all interest in the girl, as well as in many other young ladies. The next morning began as usual with a visit from the maid, who smiled encouragingly, and told that Madame Flavia had returned to continue her studies. At the end of the huge hall with marble columns stood a teacher in her usual strict attire. In her hands was a cane with a knob. The maid whispered in Adele's ear that if the Lord had something in mind, it would certainly be fulfilled. The teacher gave her student a contemptuous look. She pronounced her first and last name clearly, Adelaide Bonaparte, and she added that such a noble name was unworthy of such a person, and the goddess of the sea herself would be angry if she saw the great blue star on the chest of the impudent girl. Contempt was evident in the look of the piercing eyes. This person should have been taught a proper lesson, instead of being made a real lady out of her. Ordering him to kneel, she swung her cane as if intending to strike. All her life, the poor beggar woman had been the one to take out her anger. This madam was no exception. After all, the unfortunate woman was not of noble origin, but a simple shoe shiner. And the lady probably wanted to hurt the commoner with such an attitude, but it seems she chose the wrong way. After all, kneeling was quite common for cleaners. Then the evil lady put her foot in an expensive shoe on the knee of this beggar. The heel of the shoe painfully pressed against the knee. At the same time, contemptuous words echoed in the huge hall about how the girl was a commodity and her only purpose was to be quietly sold to the Della Valle family. And if he dares to dream of something more, he will end up as food for sharks. She poked her cane into the thin shoulder and declared that this was the girl's place. Adele had no choice but to agree. To correct the ugly gait, a new pair of shoes was needed. Low-heeled shoes were to be worn at all times, not just in class. With trembling hands, the student took a pair of brand-new black shoes and tried them on. These were the first new shoes I ever had, and they were so beautiful. A little too small for my needs, but still gorgeous. Madame ordered to stand up and start walking around the huge hall from one end to the other until she allowed to stop. Unaccustomed to it, her legs got tangled in the folds of her wide dress. The girl was so tired that every step was difficult. She fell several times, twisting her ankle. Having tried to say that I was tired, I immediately received an angry response. so that I wouldn't dare complain during the sacred lesson. Madame was jubilant, because she was about to shout that the shabby girl was not worthy of the great name of Bonaparte and drive the stubborn woman away. But the exhausted student stood up and walked around the huge hall again, step by step, to infinity. The feet in the narrow shoes were burning like fire. This torture had been going on for several hours without a break. After another circle, Madame decided that it was time to stop this idea. Turning to the maid, she ordered her to leave. The maid had been in the hall all this time. However, Mrs. Effany refused. After all, the young master had ordered her not to leave the lady's side for a single step. The teacher softened a little, saying that she was not going to spank the student, and she swore on the name of Lorendin. The maid left the hall, closing the massive door behind her. The teacher turned around and looked at the embarrassed girl. She told the shoeshine girl to leave the mansion, but she was not embarrassed. After all, what was said completely contradicted the intentions of the gentleman who brought her here. The indignant lady ordered not to interrupt. Compared to Bonaparte, the Delavalle family were not such a chic match for marriage. And yet they were certainly superior to such a lazy and narrow-minded person as this. Realizing her situation, the scruffy girl had to leave, and the mentor promised her protection and a small reward for this. But the young lady was not at a loss. It seemed that Madame wished for the young gentleman to marry Lady Lucretia. But they hired the teacher for the exact opposite purpose, to do everything to fulfill her brother's will. Having asked for forgiveness, she said that she was forced to report everything that had happened to the master. However, the powerful lady declared that it was the will of Madame Eva Bonaparte to marry her grandson to Lady Lucrezia. To do this, use an ancient history, a contract between two ancient families. Only this contract could force the young lady's man to marry. After all, countless women were looking at Signor Cesare. However, he still couldn't settle down, and he continued to behave like a little child. So, such a noble line could well end without the appearance of heirs. And this could not be allowed. So there's no point in such a frumpy girl getting involved in the Battle of the Titans. Adele was shaking all over from what she heard. She thanked Madame for the warning, and said that she still couldn't carry out her order. But she got furious, because she had misinterpreted the answer. She decided that the impudent woman was simply asking for more money. Then the girl admitted that her motive was not money, but the fact that there was very tasty food in the mansion. After all, money and the future are something ephemeral. For those who are constantly in need, the future is like a mirage, which you can't eat right now. The enraged lady shouted that the stupid girl forgot her mind for a piece of pie, like the base habits of an animal. However, it was the truth. Constantly hungry, there was nothing else to do. Sometimes the girl couldn't sleep because of it. Often a crust of bread was the only food she got during the day. Madame Flavia walked away, maintaining perfect posture. The impudent woman's words touched some inner feelings. This little devil was skinny, bruised, and her gait left much to be desired. However, she already radiated tenderness and elegance, and she was wearing those shoes. And for some reason, my imagination pictured a girl in the arms of a young gentleman. I had to urgently find another way. A whole week of classes has already passed. Time flew by very quickly in a series of lessons. They studied etiquette, speech delivery, and social conversation. Also, the rules of communication with ladies who were higher in status. Learn to politely but firmly refuse intrusive advances from gentlemen. The least favorite lesson was practicing your gait. You had to walk in these narrow shoes that constrained your feet. The maid was very worried about the student's feet, but she did not show that she was in pain or distress. Effany was sure that the young lady's gait was almost perfect. The etiquette teacher saw it too. The speed of learning increased with each passing day. The girl absorbed knowledge like a sponge. There was still much to learn, but even now it was impossible to assume that the lady was from a lower class. One day, Adele and her maid were walking in the park. Suddenly, they saw a group of girls. They were chatting and giggling a little to the side. The young lady had never seen them before. It turned out that they were members of the delegation from Orkanen. Mrs. Effany felt sorry for her charge. Constant lessons left no time even to read the news. A few days ago, the second prince ascended the throne of Orkanen. This happened with the support of Lord Cesare. It took a lot of effort. After all, the prince had no support in the palace. But in the end, everything worked out. For this help, Emperor Orkanina generously rewarded the young master. A whole retinue arrived. So now the estate was lively. It turned out that the brother had a very broad sphere of influence, even broader than one could have imagined, to influence the succession to the throne in a foreign country. Suddenly, the girls came to life. They were standing close to the marble rotunda and were the first to see the Duke. He greeted him affably. He paid attention to each lady. The girls babbled shyly that they were looking for the young gentleman in the park. Adele also saw her brother. He was magnificent in his light walking suit, the darling of fate and the favorite of the gods. A ladies' man and a man to be praised, as if he were the sea goddess. However, it was noticeable that there was no interest in the gentleman's eyes at all. Rather, there was emptiness. His gaze seemed to be looking through the girls. The maid hurried her charge. They had to leave immediately. After all, they could be noticed in the shadow of the trees. Suddenly, the young man turned his head in their direction. The flock of girls also became animated. There was probably something interesting there. The young man said that it was a mermaid. But there was one next to him. The man covered the eyes of one of the girls with light golden hair with his hand. She was embarrassed and called the gentleman a joker. Then the gentleman leaned down to the very ear with the ruby earring and whispered that he was expecting the lady at his place this evening. The blonde was embarrassed but promised to think about it. However, on the condition that the gentleman had serious intentions regarding her, Cesare immediately lost interest in the beauty. It seemed it was time to put an end to all this. After all that was needed was a one-night stand. No serious relationship. Although her light golden hair seemed so alluring, but the feeling evaporated somewhere. It was sweet and impudent. The girl was extremely disappointed. The earrings in her neat ears trembled nervously, but suddenly the beauty agreed to come. However, the womanizer had already lost interest in this. He quickly left the company of girls. The young gentleman lit a cigar and slowly approached the place where he noticed Adele with her maid. Not seeing the ladies in the shade of the trees, the gentleman moved towards the center of the park. And suddenly he heard a woman's scream. Coming closer, Cesare saw that his sister was standing in the fountain, knee-deep in water. Her hand was tightly clutched by a young man. His intentions were obvious, and the following story happened. Adele, accompanied by a maid, approached the fountain in the center of the park. The girl was noticeably limping. Every step was difficult, and at some point her tired legs couldn't take it anymore and the poor thing fell onto the path. Mrs. Effany asked her companion to show her feet. They were worn raw with swollen, bloody calluses. It was impossible to walk in those awful shoes any longer. Something had to be done urgently. Find a painkiller. Today's lesson was, of course, over. The maid advised to put her tired feet in the water for now, and she ran to the mansion for help. The pain subsided a little thanks to the cool water. Of course, it was unpleasant, but nothing compared to life in Camorra. Suddenly, men's voices were heard somewhere nearby. They were discussing that Signor Cesare was planning to throw a party. Adele decided that they were noblemen, and they were heading straight for the fountain where the girl was sitting. She urgently needed to hide. The company continued to discuss the gossip, that Lucrezia had disappeared somewhere. After all, she was supposed to become Cesare's partner, and Mr. Della Valle ordered his daughter to slow down. Adele hid behind the massive sculpture in the center of the fountain. She was afraid to even breathe so as not to give herself away. It seemed that the young people had left, but suddenly someone called out from behind. With a lewd smile, they grabbed her by the arm. The unceremonious black-haired man pulled the girl, and she fell right into the fountain, immediately wetting all her clothes. Someone from the company said that the guy was overdoing it, but he just smirked, pretended that the beauty had fallen herself. The men came closer. The black-haired man reasoned that the girl did not look like either a noblewoman or a lady. After all, they would not stand in the fountain without shoes on their feet, but the clothes were too expensive for a maid or a worker. Adele was silent. After all, it looked like the guy was drunk. He clearly took her for an easy girl, and he did not hesitate to shout insults and threaten to hit her. The friends tried to stop the raging guy. After all, they were in the Bonaparte estate. But the dark-haired man assured that the master had no relation to the maid. He laughed that Bonaparte had really already become king. The girl tried to pull her hand away, and in a stern voice she ordered to let it go. Her manner of speaking was similar to that of an aristocrat. The company couldn't figure out who this thing was. They asked each other who it could be, either a maid or a prostitute who secretly snuck into a rich house. And there's a lot of work for someone like that right now. The beauty struggled. Then the one who held her shouted loudly that such a girl would not be able to get human relations from the bastard Cesare, so no need to pretend. Let him get down to his usual work, there are plenty of clients. And then everyone saw Cesare approaching the company. The young people immediately calmed down. The dark-haired man bowed to the gentleman. The owner of the estate immediately recognized the bully. It was Henry Fetch, the one who was shouting about the bastard Cesare. But there was no talk about the master at all. The owner continued, "The head of the Fetch family will be informed about what happened, and he will most likely not be happy about this story. After all, the Fetch family experienced some financial difficulties, and they came to the Bonaparte estate more than once, all for the sake of trying to gain the favor of Mr. Cesare, and to get some money on loan. Even this time he brought Madame for this purpose." The bully couldn't stand these words, and he almost attacked Cesare. At the same time, he shouted that he had crossed the line. But the gentleman was unperturbed, treating the younger sister of the heir to Bonaparte like a prostitute. That's what it means to cross the line. The whole company froze in place. No one believed their ears. Cesare's younger sister, but he was the only child in the family. Cesare said the name. Adelaide Bonaparte, his younger sister. And he stepped right into the fountain, holding out his hand to the girl. He took off his jacket, sewn by the best craftsman, and threw it over the shoulders of the beauty. He asked how such a story happened. In a few words, the girl said that she was just soaking her feet in cool water and enjoying the singing of birds. Until these three came. The boys began to say in turn that everything about the sister was a lie. Every sea fish knows that Cesare has no brothers or sisters. The gentleman looked at the company with a stern look and said that now there is. His parents still had true love. And anyway, it is not proper for the Lord to start explaining. The young people did not want to conflict with such an influential gentleman, and they began to babble excuses. It is difficult to recognize a lady and a girl sitting in a fountain. After all, she was sitting barefoot with wounded feet. Adele was embarrassed and muttered an apology in a quiet voice. After all, she was afraid of disgracing the Bonaparte family and trained very hard. That's why her legs suffered. And the girl sent the maid Effie to the mansion for help. After all, she could no longer walk on her own. And it was impossible to even think that something like this could happen in the Bonaparte estate. Cesare leaned over and picked the girl up in his arms. He quietly whispered in her ear that there was no shame, and that she should not overdo it in her studies. But Adele was very afraid of becoming a laughingstock in high society. This would cast a shadow on the entire Bonaparte family. The young man gently touched her forehead with his lips. There should be no such conversations between loving relatives. The girl was taken aback. She had never heard anything like that in her entire life, even as a joke. It was probably customary for aristocrats to behave like that with their loved ones. She was pretending to be the heiress of a noble family after all. So she thanked her brother with a kiss on the cheek, as was customary in society. Cesare played along with his sister, also responding in an appropriate manner. The company came alive again. It seemed that she really was Cesare's sister. They even looked very similar, and amber eyes and dark thick hair. Finally, the young gentleman decided to completely embarrass the company. Like maybe they want to have some fun with their little sister. They babbled that they were wrong. They tried to stop the bully Henry, and they didn't know that the lady was Cesare's younger sister. It turned out that it was possible to behave in this way with any other girl. And again there were apologies. The young man decided to end the conversation. He said that he forgives impudent people. Perhaps he too could accidentally torment some young lady, maybe from their families. And the gentleman hopes for forgiveness, because it will be out of ignorance. The young people did not like this at all, but there was nothing to be done. The gentleman never got the girl to her feet. He carried her in his arms along the park alley, and she held tightly to the man's broad shoulder. Several pairs of curious female eyes were watching this scene from afar. So the man with the girl in his arms approached the front entrance of the mansion. Suddenly, the mood changed dramatically. Why should he do all this nonsense? Adele decided that the gentleman was just tired. She wished to descend from the strong arms to the ground, but unbearable pain pierced her wounded feet, and she collapsed to the floor. Just a walking disaster. The gentleman asked where the maid was. The lady reminded him that she had gone to get help. Perhaps she would bring a wheelchair so that he could move around. This made Cesare angry. After all, he didn't hire a cripple who couldn't even walk. The girl stammered an apology for the terrible scene at the fountain, that she had never expected to meet anyone in the garden. Suddenly the man stepped on the girl's sore foot with his boot. Tears gushed from her eyes from the unbearable pain. And Cesare said such words that you just wanted to die. That the girl was probably in the garden for a reason. Probably to have fun with a bunch of men. Or maybe it's an old habit that remained from the slums. Or some other circumstances. due to which something incomprehensible happened in Bonaparte's garden. Suddenly, a wave of anger washed over the girl lying on the floor. Her hands clenched into fists and her whole body became like a spring. That is, the gentleman thinks that it was she who provoked that terrible scene in the park. Seduced the impudent men. Yes, he thought so. But it was not so at all. The girl raised herself up on her hands and silently looked into Cesare's eyes. But he only burst out laughing. It seems that Madame Flavia had a strong influence on the student. She simply suppressed all the will of this unfortunate girl, neither engage in verbal sparring, nor curry favor or flirt. A lady has so many options in her arsenal, but this pathetic person is only good at pleading, and completely throwing away her pride. That's what she did that time in the park. She allowed this to happen, but she could have stood up for herself. Of course, the gentleman is right, and she was not careful enough. The sense of danger did not work at the most necessary moment. Signor Cesare turned away, and contemptuously said that the girl should treat the wounds and heal the feet, so that no traces would remain. The maid Effie appeared in the open door. The sight that met her eyes was horrifying. After all, she was very worried about her charge. She tried to say something to the young gentleman, but he was too angry, and he abruptly interrupted her in mid-sentence. He also insisted that classes be cancelled for 3 days, and without saying another word, he left. The maid looked at the girl lying on the floor with pity. She understood how difficult it was for her to learn. Cesare sat at his desk in his office. He lit an expensive cigar and sorted through the papers on the table. In front of him lay a portrait of the bully from the park. Henry Fetch, the second son in the family without inheritance rights, a man of absolutely no worth. And this nonentity did such things in Bonaparte's garden. It was urgently necessary to sort this matter out to the end. The whole plan went awry. Adelaide's identity was revealed, which meant there was no other candidate to play the role of sister. Now it was simply necessary to turn a simple shoeshiner into a true Bonaparte, at any cost. A morning picture in the garden came to mind, clearly provocative. That luxurious hair in the water, like emerald seaweed, salt white skin, wet clothes that almost allowed you to see your chest. Those bastards must have remembered the smallest details. Although he also remembered the tender kiss of gratitude for saving him, and the large amber eyes, which seemed to look into his very soul. If even Cesare fell for it, the game would be played out to the end. Ezra della Valle only needs to see such a nymph. There was a knock at the door of the office. It was Madame the teacher. She greeted Monsieur Bonaparte, wishing him the protection of the goddess. The gentleman just wanted to talk about his ward. He wasn't interested in teaching methods at all, but he shouldn't be too zealous. Madame apologized and wanted to present her arguments, but the gentleman interrupted the tirade before it began. No one dared bother him. Madame Flavia had no choice but to leave her study. Her thoughts occupied her entire journey to her room. This impudent shoeshiner turned out to be no ordinary thing. She deliberately exhausted herself. She trained her gait until she wore out all her feet. As a result, she put the teacher in the worst light. This could have gotten into the disfavor of the gentleman. Meanwhile, in the park gazebo, a different story was unfolding. Young girls were gossiping about the morning incident. It turned out that Cesare had a lover, most likely a commoner. She was sitting in the fountain completely barefoot early in the morning. After all, the gentleman wouldn't get involved with a noble lady, although tastes change. In any case, the relationship between these two is not the most ordinary, and the ladies' man was very kind, much more kind than usual. He carried her into the central wing, but Cesare never let girls there. "Who is this impudent woman?" asked the red-haired girl with cute long curls. "Lady Genevieve." She was the most animated in discussing the details of what had happened. Citing poor health, she hurried to leave the flock of girls, and almost ran towards the mansion. After all, it was necessary to urgently inform Lucretia about everything. In the candlelight, a quill with a carved pattern flickered over the paper. Genevieve was writing a letter to her friend. It was reported that a dark cloud hung over the future of Lady Lucrezia. Today it became known that Mr. Cesare was caught in the park with a girl in his arms, and he carried her to the main wing of the mansion. It was unknown who the girl was who had lured the gentleman. It was also written that Genevieve wanted to meet the lady as soon as possible, and to give her consolation. Having summoned the maid, she handed over a letter sealed with sealing wax, with the order to urgently deliver it personally to the hands of Lady Lucrezia della Valle. As soon as the letter was delivered, Lucretia began to read it greedily. The utter nonsense was written by her friend. Was Mr. Cesare really going to test his bride again? It couldn't be. And the letter flew straight into the flames of the burning fireplace. News spread rapidly throughout the estate. Everyone was discussing only one thing. Mr. Cesare was hiding his beloved in the main wing. Orcane's delegation saw him carefully carrying an unknown girl in his arms. Tenderness shone through in every movement. It was also said that Henry Fetch paid for his behavior. Bonaparte demanded a huge sum of money back, that his family had invested in the Fetch family business. And of course, everyone wondered who the girl was with whom the famous womanizer Cesare Bonaparte fell in love. This was too much. Madame Flavia was furious. Rumors about the shameless girl had reached her too. The honor of the Bonaparte family could be tarnished. It was necessary to get rid of this insidious and impudent commoner as soon as possible. With a menacing shout, the teacher opened the doors of her students' chambers and walked quickly inside the room. She immediately stood up and greeted Madame, also politely inquired about her health. She wished for the blessing of the goddess. The enraged teacher couldn't believe her eyes. After all, only 3 days had passed since their last lesson, and the girl had noticeably become prettier. The sunken cheeks began to round out, and the wounds and bruises on the body practically disappeared. Now the student resembled a maiden from ancient legends who lured sailors to the bottom of the sea. Madame Flavia loudly told of the talk in every corner of the estate, of the unseemly appearance of a shameless woman before gentlemen. After all, she should have been sitting quietly in the mansion, correcting her gait, and not sitting in the fountain barefoot and soaking wet. Adele offered her sincere apologies. She herself was not happy about what happened. But then the maid asked permission to say a few words. Effie was present in the room and heard everything. In her opinion, the student has already honed her gait sufficiently, and it meets all the standards of high society. Therefore, it may be worth moving on to the next stage of training, so that the lady can learn new useful skills. Madame raised an eyebrow. It seemed that the impudent girl had moved Effie to her pity and drawn her over to her side, and Mr. Cesare was watching the training process. It was necessary to adapt to the situation and find a more thoughtful way to get rid of the impudent shoeshine girl. However, the next lesson also showed that the student was trying her best. She grasped everything on the fly and took into account every detail. And this was very different from other girls. They would go into hysterics at any difficulty. But here Madame had absolutely nothing to find fault with. That same evening, Madame Flavia was resting in her chambers and thinking about the situation that had arisen. Suddenly someone said hello. Lucrezia della Valle entered the room. It was not for nothing that she was called the first beauty in high society, the ideal lady whom everyone looked up to. Madame inquired what business had brought the young lady to the Bonaparte mansion. What was the reason for the unexpected visit? She heard that the cream of society had arrived here. The servants were running off their feet. It seemed that a lavish reception was planned for the delegation from Orcanine. It is known that Mr. Cesare has close ties to the Orcanean Empire. Not long ago, he even helped the new emperor ascend to the throne. The girl asked if everything was all right with the gentleman. After all, the lady had not been out in public for some time. Therefore, she could not see him. Madame realized that the rumors had reached the Della Valle estate, and Lady Lucrezia was nervous about it. After all, she had long adored the gentleman. Madame Flavia decided to reveal some details of this story, to hint to Lucretia about the family connection between the two. Suddenly a thought flashed through her mind that had been bothering the teacher lately, about how to drive the impudent commoner out of the estate. Let Lucretia help with this. After all, Madame was under the close control of the master, and she had already received one warning, and Lady Lucrezia was elegance itself, and she was directly interested in her place as Cesare's bride. Madame looked intently into the eyes of the young lady, and carefully choosing her words, she began her story, that the girl about whom there were rumors is a direct relative of the gentleman, the daughter of Madame Caterina and Monsieur Rohan Bonaparte. Lady Lucretia blushed. It turned out that she had been very much mistaken about the whole story. However, Madame Flavia clarified some details. Madame Adelaide Bonaparte is the younger sister of Monsieur Cesare, although in reality its origin is not fully known. After all, you can't ask Caterina and Rohan Bonaparte directly. A transparent hint was given. Then the lady could compare the parting words herself and draw conclusions for herself. Lucretia sincerely wished Madame the blessing and protection of the goddess. After all, thanks to this conversation, many things could be understood and compared. It was morning tea time. The young lady was enjoying a beautifully brewed herbal tea with a variety of desserts. The maid insisted that a morning walk was necessary. After all, it was part of the daily routine. However, Adele was against it. Fear was overwhelming her after everything that had happened in the park. To avoid meeting the guests, you could take a walk towards the water garden. There was a huge hydrolide there. It would amaze the lady to the depths of her soul. The girl softened a little. Perhaps the maid felt ordinary pity for her, and she sincerely thanked Effie for her concern. The park was truly beautiful. The fountain cascades were striking in their scope. Numerous water sculptures decorated the composition. The marble gods and goddesses seemed alive. Adele, accompanied by her maid, admired the fountains, and the air filled with moisture brought relief to her wounded heart. There was already someone at one of the fountains. Lady Lucrezia della Valle, accompanied by her companion, greeted them. Adele curtsied deeply. It was almost perfect. She wished for the blessing of the goddess. Lucretia said she did not remember meeting the young lady in salons or at balls. The interlocutor said she had not yet made her debut in high society. Then the noble lady gave her full name, Lucrezia of the Della Valle family, and she raised an eyebrow questioningly at the young lady. This was the very moment that the simple shoe shiner had been so afraid of. But she gathered her courage, and she imagined that her name was Adelaide Bonaparte. The guest seemed genuinely surprised. Perhaps this was a new joke that had spread through high society. After all, the lady had only recently returned to society. Adele dispelled doubts. She really belongs to the Bonaparte family. However, due to certain circumstances, she grew up separately from her older brother Cesare. The interlocutor was even more surprised. It turns out that the lady lives in the same mansion as Mr. Cesare, in the main wing of Bonaparte, and then she offered the young lady the opportunity to travel, to leave Fornati and explore different corners of Saint-Nar. The girl muttered that she still planned to stay close to her family, here in the Bonaparte estate. There was a pause. Adele could not read the expression on the face of such a beauty. Perhaps she was just nervous, or because her interlocutor was a real lady. Having said a quick farewell, Lucretia wished the young lady protection from murderers in the skies and waters, and she walked away quickly. The maid's face clearly showed concern. Mrs. Della Valle knew something. The words spoken at parting were disturbing. The master needed to be informed about this urgently. Even if Lady Lucretia does not enter into open confrontation with the young master, however, the reefs can be more terrible than the waves. The carriage, drawn by 2 horses, moved briskly in the light of the setting sun. The lady and her assistant Hazel were leaving the estate. Lucrezia consulted with her companion. She did not know what to do in this situation. It seemed that Mr. Cesare had once again fallen in love with some harlot. She did not understand the reason for the alarm. After all, it turned out that Adelaide was the younger sister of Mr. Bonaparte. However, the girl was adamant. The hands of the girl from the park could not belong to a noble lady. It seems that Cesare hated his bride so much that he brought a girl from the street and called her his little sister. And if that rogue doesn't manage to keep Mr. Cesare, she will probably want to marry Lucrezia's brother. Something had to be done urgently, before this harlot took away Mr. Cesare. Besides, she could become a member of the Della Valle family. Hazel insisted that they had to find a way to drive the girl away themselves. However, Lady Lucretia did not want to make a mistake and cause harm to anyone. Then the companion promised her help. The lady did not expect such a gift, and she was sincerely glad that there was such a devoted person nearby. The line of carriages, drawn by 2 horses, stretched for 100 meters. The driveway of the Bonaparte estate was covered with coats of arms of various wealthy families. Many noble gentlemen and ladies were honored to be invited to a social reception at the Bonaparte estate. The servants were running off their feet. Every now and then the butler's orders about decorating the tapestries and arranging flowers could be heard. Adele watched from the high stairs as the proceedings progressed. The nervous atmosphere of the upcoming reception affected everyone. Sometime later she decided to talk to Signor Cesare, and she resolutely headed towards his office. She knocked lightly on the door. But then she remembered the rule that forbade knocking on the door of the owner's office. Slightly embarrassed, the girl opened the door and saw 2 young men. Her brother was sitting at the table, and behind him stood an unfamiliar red-haired man. He stopped sorting through the papers and told the gentleman that he had a visitor. Cesare raised his head, and with a smile asked how Adelaide was feeling. Had the wounds on her feet healed? The girl was embarrassed but thanked him for his concern, and said that everything had gotten better. The wounds and blisters had almost healed. With a cynical smile, the gentleman said that he was not at all worried about his sister, but she only paid a tribute to politeness. Cesare raised an eyebrow in surprise and asked why the girl had come to his office. The young lady gathered her courage and smiled, and asked for the opportunity to attend today's reception. Cesare had not expected that his sister could be so sweet. The young man standing next to him did not understand who this lady was, who had entered the office without permission and was asking the gentleman such questions. Then the gentleman introduced his younger sister Adelaide. In response, he introduced Mr. Cesare's personal secretary, Gigi Manfredi. This red-haired guy was very smiling. He added that he was also the deputy manager of the Stallone Corporation, Cesare Buonaparte's company. The young man was struck by Adele's beauty, as if a sea nymph had swum from the depths of the sea, but he did not show it, and continued to talk about business with the gentleman. The girl thought about it. They had known each other for several days. However, it seemed that during this time, several layers had already been cut off from the delicate soul. But the girl still decided to forget about that unfortunate day, when the gentleman stepped on her wounded foot and said terrible words. Cesare suddenly asked if his sister had seen Lucrezia. It was allegedly reported that the young lady had received a noble warning. The maid Effie knew a lot more about small talk than the shoeshine girl on the street. After the reception is over, the master will assign a brochure to the sister, a servant who accompanies noble ladies up to the age of 18 when they leave the house. The conversation was over and the embarrassed girl left the office. In appearance and manners, she was already almost an elegant lady. However, the dialogue continued between the two men. The assistant reminded that the brochure would arrive only in 2 days. This means the young lady will be unattended during the reception, at which Lucrezia will also be present. The gentleman thought about it. After all, nothing bad could happen in Bonaparte's estate. However, he ordered Manfredi to prepare one galley, and let the ship be as old as possible. The assistant was extremely dissatisfied with the work and worries that had fallen on him. However, he did not dare to say anything out loud. Every now and then, in the lavishly decorated halls, social conversations were held. That Flavia Loredan had also arrived for the reception. It turned out that Mr. Cesare had summoned her again. Although Loredan had long since lost the confidence of Monsieur Bonaparte, perhaps there was an intention to return Madame to the pedestal of high society. The Loredan family lost its position for a short time. However, Madame the teacher decided to stay close to Bonaparte to improve her position. She was brought out of her thoughts by the voice of Lady Lucretia. She started a small talk about how everything at the ball was at the highest level. After all, this reception was organized by Bonaparte himself. The exquisite furnishings and decorations are chosen with taste. Undoubtedly, Mr. Cesare has a refined sense of beauty. Then Lucretia switched to a whisper. She suggested talking about the things that needed to be gotten rid of from this beautiful mansion. Madame was noticeably embarrassed. Fear flashed in her eyes. She could add nothing to the previous conversation that took place on the day of Lady Lucretia's arrival. Then the girl hinted that perhaps it was worth talking about this matter with Mr. Cesare, and to tell about the revelations that I received from Madame the teacher of etiquette concerning the origin of Lady Adelaide Bonaparte. Madame was beside herself. She could not understand how this could happen. After all, she favored Lady Lucretia and trusted her. But the treacherous lady only said that she was very upset. After all, Mr. Cesare trusted Madame, and she revealed their common secret. The lady smiled charmingly, but there was ice in her eyes. She did not wish to confront Madame Flavia. She only wanted a little help in their common cause. Everything will be kept in the strictest confidence. It was pitiful to look at the teacher. Her face was distorted by a grimace of hatred. She had inadvertently led herself into a trap. She said through her teeth, looking at her wily interlocutor, that she agreed. The atmosphere in the estate was solemn and joyful at the same time. The sounds of music could be heard in different corners. In the ballroom, couples were dancing. Gentlemen in formal tailcoats and beautiful ladies in dresses of every possible color. Adele sat in front of a large mirror. The maid reported that the reception had already begun. Along the way, she helped to style her hair into an elegant hairstyle. The young lady was worried that she was holding up Effie, but she was in no hurry. After all, she was not an aristocrat, and her presence at the reception was not obligatory. Seeing how the girl was worried, she asked the reason. The ward was upset that everyone would see her shortcomings and flaws. But the young lady was simply beautiful, and if such a beauty appeared in the ballroom, everyone would turn in her direction. Adele did not fully trust her assistant. Any miscalculation and the social sharks would sink their teeth into the victim. Effie decided to cheer up the debutante. After all, preparation for the reception can be more interesting than the reception itself. Lady Bonaparte never wears the same outfit twice. Hat, umbrella, dress, jewelry, and even stockings. All this was bought new each time. So you will need to visit Bella Stella Street every day. Even as a shoe shiner, the girl knew about this street. But she had never been there. That place was too shining and beautiful. And she felt that she had no right to go there. Even the names of the boutiques resembled lines from romantic poems. The maid's words excited the beauty very much. She wanted to ask again and again about this wonderful place, and imagine herself among the beautiful shop windows and signs. Suddenly someone knocked on the bedroom door. The ladies weren't expecting anyone, and at the same time they were wary. Madame Flavia stood on the threshold. She had an unusual appearance, a sidelong glance and a slightly wrinkled collar, as if she was in a hurry to get somewhere. She turned to Effie. That Mrs. Eva wanted an additional report regarding Mr. Cesare. For this, the maid's notes are needed. Therefore, she had to go with Madame immediately. Effie returned to the bedroom for a second and reported an urgent matter. Something was bothering her assistant, but from behind the door, Madame hurried her. After all, the chairwoman was expecting her report, and the maid hurried away. Adele decided to read a little. She took a book and sat down on an elegant ottoman. Barely audible music was coming from the ballroom. But her dreams led her to Bella Stella Street. The girl was so excited that she couldn't read a single line, or even connect the letters into words. Suddenly, there was another knock at the door. Effie couldn't have come back that quickly. She wondered who it could be then. Someone's voice insistently said that it was not necessary to open. It was simply shouting, warning of danger. Adele looked around. There was no one in the room except her. It was unclear what kind of voice it was. There was another knock on the door. And suddenly the door opened. In the doorway stood an unfamiliar girl with a cap pulled low over her eyes. It looked like a servant from the mansion. At least the uniform said so. She asked for forgiveness, for entering without waiting for permission. But the situation did not tolerate delay. She said that the owner urgently called his sister. Someone's voice kept repeating the danger. Something was wrong. The maid looked too young. The clothes were clearly too big. However, Cesare could have called his sister, perhaps to give some parting words before going out into the world. And she agreed. She threw a silk stole over her shoulders, and the maid quickly led the girl up the stairs. She said that the master was waiting on the roof. Adele slowed down a little. The voice was already screaming in her head, and her legs refused to follow the maid, although she thought differently. Cesare would not reveal his plans to some servant. Therefore, everything seemed plausible. At the very end of the stairs, the girl announced that they had arrived, and she opened the door leading to the roof. The wind was quite strong. The unbraided hair was fluttering. The girl went out onto a small terrace on the roof, but the gentleman was not there. Then she turned to the maid to find out what was going on, but someone's strong hands pushed her in the back. There was no way to stay on the edge, and Adele flew down. The girl in the cap remained standing on the roof of the Bonaparte mansion. Meanwhile, 1,000,000 candles were burning in the ceremonial hall. Pleasant music was playing. Wine was flowing like a river. Everyone was congratulating the Duke. Such an incredible man. The youngest person to become a prior. Moreover, he was recently able to put a prince of a neighboring country on the throne. The current emperor was a cousin of Mr. Cesare, so the political benefits were obvious. The right to vote in parliament was very powerful. The young gentleman was from a good family, handsome, with excellent business acumen and political instinct. A darling of fortune. Everyone was wondering who this handsome man would marry. Lucrezia della Valle, it seems, will soon put the ring on him. Cesare got tired of the noise and decided to smoke a cigar on the balcony, to be away from these looks and whispers for a while. The gold of his dress uniform glittered in the moonlight. Finally, he could be in silence. Suddenly my gaze fell upon a barely noticeable inscription on the balcony vault. Someone had written it with charcoal on the light vault. There were only 2 letters. K.R. Catherine and Rohan Bonaparte, Cesare's parents. On ball days, these two always danced together, and little Cesare was seated on the most luxurious chair in the ballroom, and cookies were given to his hands. Then they could be in their own world for a few hours, where they belonged only to each other, and no one was able to stop them. His friend's voice pulled him out of his pleasant memories. He opened the window and shouted to Cesare that all the ladies were waiting for his return. The young man wore an exquisite silk stole over his shoulders. Cesare laughed. Jude had come to the reception he had given wearing a silly shawl. The friend started to fool around. He said he was going about his business, and the shawl fell on his shoulders by itself. It fell from the sky. A lucky chance can create destiny. When Cesare gets rid of Lady Lucrezia, he will give his heart to a suitable girl. Perhaps this shawl will decide the fate of the young gentleman. A randomly chosen thing will change his future life. The master of the house did not remain silent. It turns out that it is impossible to choose another girl as a bride because of Lucretia, fearing that she will destroy the chosen one. Suddenly, the young man saw an exquisite embroidered monogram on the tip of the scarf. KB Katharina Bonaparte. This thing belonged to his mother, and now Adele uses it. But how could this shawl fall from the sky? It was urgent to ask Jude where and when he had picked up the silk cape. And this is what happened on the roof. When someone pushed Adele in the back, she swayed and fell down. But miraculously, she managed to catch hold of the eaves of the roof, and she was holding on to the very edge with just her fingers. But now she could clearly see who had pushed her. It was the little maid, and the lady immediately remembered her. This is the companion who accompanied Lady Lucretia, and it seems that it was she who made her companion do this. The maid was standing at the very edge, and the lady was hanging from the eaves of the roof, and there was no one nearby to help. Then Adele began to ask for her hand. She insisted that all the blame for what had happened would fall on Lucretia, and not on the maid, and that Lady Della Valle will not leave alive anyone who is privy to this matter. She will kill him so that no one will know the truth. The maid clearly didn't expect this. She didn't think about the consequences of her actions. But these words seemed to be true. However, either fear prevailed or love for her mistress. The maid stepped on Adele's wrist with her heel. Let her die. And the girl flew down, into the darkness of the night, into the bony clutches of death itself, straight to the projecting balcony, where Mr. Cesare smoked his cigar, the youngest prior, the head of the Bonaparte family, gifted with the blessing of the gods, found himself lying on the balcony floor, crushed by his sister who had fallen on top of him. She seemed to be fine. There were no visible wounds on her body. Tears were streaming from her large amber eyes. The girl held onto the young man's chest as if she was afraid to let go, but she suddenly pulled away when he noticed it. She said that a girl dressed in the uniform of a servant of the mansion pushed from the roof. She said that the master called his sister. He was extremely surprised, especially when it turned out that the lady recognized the girl. It was Lucretia's maid, his bride. Jude immediately ran to the roof, but the criminal was too fast, and he couldn't catch up with her. He shouted this from the roof to Cesare. Naturally, the girl had already disappeared by this time. The gentleman muttered, still holding his sister's hand, who had fallen from the sky like a sea wave. By the way, the girl was wearing a thin cambric undershirt, and in such an immodest form she intended to come to her brother's room. Adele was embarrassed. Her cheeks were on fire. She hadn't had time to get dressed, but the matter was urgent, and her shawl had flown away when she fell from the roof. Cesare was so angry about what happened. He couldn't contain his emotions. But the girl was thinking about something and didn't react to her brother's attacks. It was necessary to urgently cover up the inappropriate appearance of the beauty. Cesare took off his dress jacket and threw it over her thin shoulders. It was obvious that every movement caused pain to the young man. The gentleman groaned and grabbed his side with his hand. Traces of blood were clearly visible on his shirt. The sister almost choked on what she saw, and she leaned closer to examine the wound. She asked sympathetically about how he was feeling. The brother smiled, despite the pain. The shoe shiner had been through a lot herself in the last few days. Now she was asking about his health. Perhaps she forgot how his boot stepped on her sore foot. Or about the hurtful words spoken in a fit of anger. How the young man wanted this girl to court him. He even had indecent images in his head, but someone was already running towards them. It was a friend who had come down from the roof. Jude was very worried about his master and his sister. In the office, the doctor examined Cesare's wound. The huge bruise on his side looked very scary. Luckily, the internal organs were not seriously injured. However, physical activity should be avoided for some time. And of course, during the recovery period, you need to stop smoking cigars. Cesare cursed, but the doctor was adamant. From tomorrow onwards, it is necessary to apply compresses daily. The doctor will send a person, but his patient refused, saying that he should leave everything necessary for the procedures. Adele understood why she had to follow the unknown maid. It was all because of Cesare's attitude to business. Suddenly, the office door swung open, Effie flew into the room without knocking, shouting that the lady was missing and that she was looking for her charge. But then the maid saw Adele, in an inappropriate form and in a terrible state. The gentleman smiled slightly, and told what happened on the roof of the mansion, and then on that ill-fated balcony. It was a pity to look at Effie. It was all because of her carelessness that she had to leave her charge alone. Although doubts about the veracity of the teacher's words immediately crept into my head, it was alarming that the lady urgently needed a report during the reception. Cesare did not accuse the maid of negligence. After all, Madame Flavia herself came for her, and allegedly conveyed the mistress's order. It was impossible to suspect her. Jude entered the room. Everyone present immediately turned their gaze to the red-haired young man. He reported that by order of the Lord, the knights were to imprison Madame Flavia Loredan. Also, anyone who tried to leave the estate would be detained. Cesare was pleased with the order carried out, and he asked his assistant if the galley was ready. He confirmed it. Then it was necessary to send it to dear Madame Flavia. Cesare said these words with feeling and put out his cigar, and now he demanded that Lucretia be brought to him, and as soon as possible. A long conversation lay ahead. There was a knock at the door. Adele immediately remembered the rule: don't knock on your brother's office door. Now the reason for this was clear. Only a stranger was knocking at the door. It was like a conventional sign warning of danger, and it gave time to prepare. The gentleman ordered his sister to sit next to him on the sofa, and to move as close as possible. It was announced that Lucrezia della Valle had arrived. She had an angelic look. Her hands were folded submissively on her skirts. Her eyes were half lowered. The gentleman apologized for meeting Lady della Valle in such a state. After the doctor's examination, his torso was naked. The girl raised her eyes, and before her appeared a picture that shocked her. On the sofa sat a gentleman with his sister. Lucretia stuttered, only able to squeeze out the traditional greeting to the master, and stood there, unable to move. Cesare gestured to his bride to sit down on the sofa. She did not dare refuse, although her legs did not quite obey. There was a little maid next to Lucretia, and it was clearly a different girl. Adele immediately noticed that the lady had already managed to change the maid. The gentleman immediately paid attention to this. He asked if the lady had always had this girl as a maid. She confirmed, yes, a niece's maid. Cesare was starting to get angry. Only Lucrezia could lie and evade so brazenly, but she stood her ground. It was this assistant who had been serving him all the time. The lady nervously fingered her cape, and demanded that the little girl confirm her words. She certainly fulfilled her mistress's will. The gentleman noticed Lucretia's quick movements. If it weren't for the marriage story, she would have made an ideal business partner. The lady blushed and thanked him. Cesare couldn't believe his ears. She pretended nothing had happened. It felt like this person had already forgotten the recent murder attempt, and all her thoughts were focused only on the young master, as if she was out of her mind. Finally, Lucrezia noticed the appearance of Mr. Cesare, and the wound on his side. It seemed that he had suffered greatly. Cesare turned slowly to Adele. Amber eyes met the same female eyes. He said he had to catch a mermaid falling from the sky. That's why he got injured. But now everything is fine. Lady della Valle didn't know what to say. The situation had clearly gotten out of hand, but she immediately came to her senses. She smiled sweetly, her most charming smile, and offered to help take care of the young master. The gentleman refused the services, cynically said that Lady Lucretia was not guilty of what had happened, and therefore it was not worth burdening her. Besides, the younger sister is always nearby, and is quite capable of taking care of her brother. The cunning schemer had an answer for everything. It is impossible for an old maid to be in the same bedroom with a gentleman, and to court him. There will be gossip in society. But Cesare was adamant. This was his younger sister, and she had the right to be in this house wherever she wanted. He looked at Adele and added slyly, "It's even a pity to give such a beauty to Della Valle's older brother." Then he looked sternly at Lucretia. This time he promised not to connect her person with what happened. But there won't be a second time, and if the lady has something else in mind, there will be no mercy. The proceedings will then move to the interclan level. Tears flowed from Lucretia's eyes. Her pitiful appearance did not move anyone to pity. It only caused disgust. Meanwhile, the teacher was in the room under the supervision of armed guards. She had no doubt that Lucrezia's plan had failed, and the shadow now fell on Madame Flavia as well. Suddenly, the side door opened slightly, and a man in a dark cloak appeared through the narrow gap, with a low-pulled hood. In accordance with the order of the head of the Bonaparte family, Madame Flavia Loredan was to follow him. The carriage moved quickly along the dark pavement. The coachman did not spare the horses. He was obviously in a hurry to get to his destination. There were 2 passengers in the carriage, a young man in a dark cape, and a noble lady in an elegant dress with her eyes blindfolded with black silk. She was visibly worried. She kept asking where and why she was being taken, and she asked to meet the gentleman. After all, she had to explain everything to him. However, the young man did not respond to these questions. Sir only once let slip that there was a reason for this. The carriage bounced on the bumps. Madame became increasingly nervous. The cries of seagulls began to be heard. A salty smell hung in the air. It seemed that the path lay towards the seashore. The sun began to paint the horizon pink, and soon the port of Santnar appeared not far away. The carriage was already waiting at the pier. A tall red-haired man opened the carriage door, and having removed the bandage, he led the madam out onto the pier. She angrily shouted that she was thirsty for an audience with Mr. Bonaparte. There was a misunderstanding, and it was necessary to give explanations. And also, another person must be blamed for everything that happened. Madame did not act of her own free will. She was threatened, and she had no choice. The red-haired boy smirked. Wasn't it Madame Teacher who revealed the secret of the young lady's origin, thus breaking the sacred oath of Omerta, the code of silence that forbade vassals from divulging any information to the outside world? All members of the nobility were bound by this oath, and those who broke it received full retribution. Tears came to the eyes of the detainee. She babbled that she had simply given a small hint, and the lady herself thought up the rest. The young man asked contemptuously. The hint was probably exhaustive. In any case, the business for which Madame had been brought to the port had to be completed, and he pointed to an old galley moored at the pier. It had been built in 1804. Some provisions had already been loaded on board: rusks, salt, sugar, cookies, etc. Also essential items, soap and candles. There was also a supply of drinking water. Taking advantage of this, the lady could reach Sork on her own. Madame the etiquette teacher blushed and clenched her fists in anger. After all, Sork is the farthest place from Santnar, and on this vessel in the open sea, even a small wave threatened imminent death. But if the traveler returns safely, the master will accept this as the will of the sea goddess, and grant forgiveness. It turns out that Flavia Loredan was sent to certain death. The young man reported to the sir in the dark cape that the explanations were finished and they could go. The men took Madame by the arms. She begged to be given just one chance, to meet with Mr. Cesare. After all, it was all for him, for the Bonaparte family. But no one was listening to her anymore. The galley, with its faded, tattered sails, was sailing out to sea. Sir Aguirre and Lord Cesare's assistant watched her with indifferent eyes. At this time in the mansion, a young dark-haired lady with amber eyes was taking a bath. The maid asked if the girl was hurt, but she was thoughtful, and she hardly paid attention to the servant. She only asked if they had found the criminal who tried to kill her. The maid Effany reported that the girl's body had been found in a nearby gutter, but it was very difficult to identify. The face was badly disfigured. However, the hair color and height matched the lady's testimony. There were no clothes on the body. Probably someone tried to cover their tracks, but on the side in the area of the ribs there were many cut wounds. But by all appearances it was the maid who pushed Lady Adelaide off the roof. However, the little maid carried out the orders of her mistress, the bride of Cesare Bonaparte. But since there is no evidence of this, the lady cannot be held accountable. If this case is made public, it will attract public attention. And Lady Lucretia is extremely beloved by the common people. And in high society she is known for her appearance and knowledge on many issues. Many wealthy families favor her. So if something were to happen to Lady Della Valle, a wave of disapproval would sweep through all strata of the population. The maid added the healing infusion to the warm bath water, and the aromas of essential oils and herbs filled the room. She continued her report. There is good news. From today on, the young lady will no longer have to attend classes on etiquette and social rules. The young master ordered to repeat and sharpen the knowledge received so far. And just the calluses on the feet from long walking will heal. The student asked where Madame Flavia had gone, but the assistant only said that they were looking for a new etiquette teacher. The maid suggested that her charge put on her best clothes. The girl expressed surprise, but Effany reminded her that the lady would be treating the young gentleman. Adele thought it was some kind of joke, but it turned out not to be. In the master's chambers, the first thing she saw was her brother lying on white sheets. His torso was wrapped in bandages. Blood was showing on his side. The girl held a tray with compressed supplies in her hands. Cesare smiled sincerely at his sister. From his place on the wide bed, the young gentleman looked at the beauty with the tray. How she had changed in a few weeks. It was as if there was no shoeshine girl. And immediately an elegant young lady with luxurious hair, beautiful breasts, and a thin waist appeared. The young man was brought out of his reverie by a question. The girl repeated it several times. Where is the pain felt? The owner was naked to the waist. Tight bandages were tightening his handsome male torso. Adele could not tear her eyes away from such an attractive picture. Broad shoulders, beautiful muscle lines, a chiseled waist. Perfection itself. That's why all the beauties of Santnar lay at his feet. Several scars from sharp blades on the torso added to the image of danger. And a birthmark on the lower back in the form of a tear completed the picture. Cesare grinned. The newly minted nurse had been looking him up and down for too long. She was embarrassed. How could she allow this to happen? She had completely lost her mind. After all, the owner of the mansion was in front of her, the one who had given her a chance that changed her whole life. The gentleman laughed out loud and admitted that he was quite attractive, but there was no point in getting excited no matter how beautiful the view was. The girl finally came to her senses. After all, she couldn't even allow such thoughts, which finally made the young man laugh. He lay face down on the bed so the young nurse could begin to treat the wound. The bandages on his broad back were pulled tight. While preparing everything necessary, Adele wondered why she was entrusted with the treatment. After all, she had no special skills. The patient muttered that she was the most suitable candidate. The doctor was constantly making noise, and the maid was constantly scolding him. Besides, the gentleman's wound is because of the girl. She is the one who bears responsibility for what happened. The girl's hands were shaking from such a responsible task. First, it was necessary to cut the bandages. Sharp scissors quickly coped with the task. She was very nervous. Although the patient did not show any dissatisfaction, he lay quietly and calmly. He even seemed to enjoy the process, but it felt like a weak victim was right next to a wild animal. Instinct told me to prepare. Now it was time to apply the healing ointment. The wound was much larger than Adele thought. It started from the back, went across the entire side, ending all the way on the chest. With light movements of her hands, the girl rubbed the healing ointment into the wound. But the gentleman was lying in such a way that it was impossible to reach his chest. Then Adele turned to her brother, so that he would turn a little and allow her to treat the wound. He grumpily refused. The nurse tried to persuade him like a little boy, at least to turn sideways a little. The patient resisted. Then the sister asked permission to climb onto the wide bed, to treat all areas, and thanked for permission. With careful movements, the girl climbed onto the bed. She was afraid to disturb the sore spot, and finished the procedure. But something seemed to have possessed Cesare. He swung his hand sharply and pushed the tray to the floor. All the medical supplies fell to the floor with a clatter. The girl found herself lying on her back on a wide bed. The gentleman was sitting on top of her, and he was holding her tightly with his hands. Cesare cynically declared that it was time to end this performance. When Adele fell from the roof right onto the signor, no one inquired about the victim's well-being. All eyes were on the gentleman. However, there was not a shadow of resentment on the lady's face. For what reason was she behaving arrogantly and stupidly? After all, if it weren't for the accident, the girl would be dead. It's unclear who should feel sorry for whom. Cesare couldn't figure it out. Surely this girl had another goal. Then he remembered her appearance. She wanted to come to her brother's office half naked, and the way she pretended to worry about him. The way her shoulders trembled, arousing deep feelings that made him want to protect the baby. It seems that the sister had a secret motive. Otherwise, she would not have forgotten how the gentleman stepped on her wounded foot with his boot. Fear was clearly visible in her large amber eyes, and misunderstanding. She whispered pleadingly, "Brother." But the gentleman sitting above only growled. To call him Cesare. After all, it was more appropriate for the bed. However, Adele repeated brother again. She did not understand why he behaved in such a way. The man ordered the cheap show to end. He is a man, strong and gentle. She is a woman, silly and sweet. So you shouldn't resist. And lie still. The obscene smile didn't leave the man's lips. In the life of the famous womanizer Cesare Buonaparte from his early youth, there was an endless number of women, young and older, blondes and brunettes. However, there were even more disappointments. All the ladies were read like an open book, with very few exceptions, so the younger sister shouldn't have become one of those ladies. But here things were completely different. It seems that the young rogue was an excellent actress. Now she will probably pretend that she cannot resist. After all, her goal is to seduce a famous womanizer. Cesare was losing patience. Enough of this pretense. Let her be honest. After all these ladies' tricks were so boring to him. The man leaned towards the ear of the lying beauty, promising to do everything as she wanted. The woman's breasts, squeezed by a tight corset, rose high. Cesare whispered into the very lips so that the little girl would open her mouth, and froze, as if he said stop to himself. If we cross this line in the imaginary family relations now, what about the agreement concluded with the Della Valle family? But he immediately abandoned this idea. Of course, they would consider the situation unfair, but let it be their family's problem. The girl really excited men's instincts. She was not just beautiful, she was damn beautiful. And it would be a pity to sleep with her only once. Suddenly, something sharp almost pierced his neck, right where his carotid artery was pulsing. The cold metal of a pair of scissors from a nurse's kit. The slum beggar's survival instincts did not fail her this time. With a deft movement of the hand, the sharp medical instrument was extracted from the corset. The most famous womanizer did not believe what was happening, but the girl's eyes expressed such fury that doubts immediately disappeared. It seemed that the sister was going to slit the throat of her offender. And this is the pathetic person who in any situation only asked for forgiveness. Yes, in the slums of Camorra, the school of life was at its best. The girl was clearly not joking, and she could pierce the senior's throat like a piece of paper. Then he stepped back a little, and carefully removed his hand with the blade of the scissors clenched, although it was not clear why she had not resisted from the very beginning. It didn't look like the seductress was going to end her game. Cesare was amused when his sister called him a rake. This devil was driving him crazy. He had never been able to restrain himself before, being in bed with another hottie, and now he had to analyze and think. And often, the scissors were shining in the woman's hand. So this girl hates him, or is just pretending. However, the girl raised her bottomless amber eyes, and whispered, "No, she does not hate. However, she is not interested in carnal pleasures." For the first time in his life, Cesare didn't understand anything. She should have told him that she despised her brother with all her soul. But she just looked with her huge eyes, straight into his soul. Then the senior muttered, getting off the girl, so that she would finish the bandage as soon as possible, since he has urgent matters. Oh, that girl. I wanted to tame her so much. Now it was a pity to give the little one to that loser Della Valle. In the Parliament Hall, members of the Signory sat at a round table, headed by the permanent chairwoman of the Parliament, Madame Eva Bonaparte. 7 representatives of the noble families of Saint-Nar. At the table, it was discussed that the delegation of Orcaine had returned home. They were grateful to Bonaparte for the warm welcome. Cesare only smiled slightly. He had done all that was required. Mr. Della Valle praised the respectfulness of the youngest prior. He had heard rumors that during the last reception his daughter Lucrezia had been granted an audience with the young gentleman. He wondered if this meant good news. After all, the treaty between the two noble families was in force. However, Cesare hinted that the reason for the lady's visit was different. The need to tell her something. And noticing the surprised looks of those gathered, he clarified the details. That Cesare's parents had sent him his younger sister. Everyone knew that Caterina and Rohan Bonaparte had left the house earlier, but no one understood what kind of sister it could be. Those present vied with each other in asking questions. However, the young gentleman said that the identity of his sister would be revealed in a few months at the debutante ball. Then she would be able to meet the son of the Della Valle family. Questions from those present continued to pour in from all sides. The brother intends to send his younger sister Adelaide to the Della Valle family. In this way, the contract will not be broken, and the Lord would have the opportunity to take care of his younger sister of marriageable age in this way, without leaving her alone. You could see how Luca Della Valle's face had changed. His thin-framed glasses were shaking nervously. His red mustache was moving. He could barely contain himself. But Cesare continued as if nothing had happened, that a remarkable event was coming for the Della Valle family, and Lady Lucrezia will be spared the necessity of marrying the prodigal son of Bonaparte. With his reputation as a ladies' man, the chairwoman, Cesare's grandmother, watched attentively without saying a word. Early in the morning, the Bonaparte mansion was illuminated by bright sunlight. Birds were chirping, as if greeting all its inhabitants. Cesare sat at the table in his study. His sister, accompanied by a maid, stood opposite him. Everyone exchanged greetings in the name of the sea goddess. The gentleman caught himself thinking that he hadn't seen the lady since that day, after the incident in the bedroom, when she almost finished him off. Today the girl was the picture of humility. There was no hint of that little beast from the slums of Kimura with sharp scissors in her hands. Cesare broke the awkward silence that had been going on for a long time. He said that he had called the lady on a completely different matter. The office door opened, and without knocking, a young man with chestnut hair entered. He was dressed in a uniform that emphasized his military bearing. The seigneur introduced the newcomer. Aguirre Correr, her brachier. From today on, he will accompany the lady at any time of the day or night. The girl had heard that name somewhere before. Of course. After all, her maid's name was Effanie Correr, so they were related. Cesare specified that Aguirre was the assistant's younger brother. But the lady noted that he was too young. The age difference was significant. Adele bowed slightly to the brachier. He greeted her back, and promised to do his utmost to protect the young lady. Time flew by, and it was time to get down to business. In Mr. Cesare's mind, images of the harlot lying on his bed still floated up. But after exchanging piercing glances, the young people parted. The lady, accompanied by her maid, headed to her chambers. This meeting did not leave Adele indifferent either. The memory resurrected that day, and the obscene scene in the bedroom. This man was definitely crazy. The gentleman imagined that his little sister was a slushy woman. He threw her down on the snow-white sheets, obviously intending to take advantage of the opportunity. But then he changed his attitude. Damn rake! The girl remembered the naked torso of the gentleman, his weight when he sat on her, and a cute teardrop mole on the small of the back. At that moment there was not a single thought in my head, only the enjoyment of true male beauty. Finally, a clear picture formed in her head. Her master was a womanizer and a scoundrel. But for some reason, the girl's heart was beating much faster than usual. The butler hurried from the front door to meet the girls. He leaned towards Mrs. Effanie and whispered something in her ear. She said in a businesslike manner that it would take a little time to get her evening attire in order. Turning to the lady, the maid informed her that the Madam Chairman was waiting for her in the Star Hall. The maid helped the lady tighten her corset. A very important meeting was coming up. Surely Madame Eva was looking for a meeting with the lady because of Cesare's words. He revealed the fact of the existence of a younger sister, and most likely the chairwoman guesses about the contractual relationship with Lady Adele. Effanie advised that under no circumstances should one lie. Tricky questions were to be left unanswered, and in such cases one was to remain silent. Finally, the outfit was completely ready. The hair was carefully arranged. The maid blessed the ward in the name of the goddess. A long corridor led to massive doors. The gates to the Holy of Holies, the Star Hall, opened before the visitor. Having crossed the threshold, the girl froze. The unearthly beauty of the room was striking, as if she had found herself in the starry sky. At the same time, being on Earth, the interior was done in dark colors, and it was in sharp contrast to the fresh atmosphere of Santnar. At the same time, the place seemed to be blinding with its radiance. True beauty. The crowning glory of all was a golden star with rays radiating in all directions above the main altar. Madam Chairwoman sat at the tea table. Her gray hair sparkled in the light of the crystal chandeliers like bright stars. Adele was so shy that she forgot the rules of etiquette. The first thing to do is to introduce yourself. Although in Santnar's company, the eldest should introduce himself first. But this case was an exception. Therefore the girl greeted Madame with a curtsy and a blessing in the name of the goddess, smiling meekly. Then she timidly uttered words of apology, that she was late with her introduction, and she gave her name, Adelaide Bonaparte. The noble face of the respectable lady did not show a shadow of surprise. A truly high-ranking person. She only poured the visitor tea from a porcelain teapot. Suddenly, Madame Chairman pulled a notepad of embossed paper towards herself, and with a thin pen she wrote a greeting, and a suggestion to call her Eva. This woman was unanimously elected as the Speaker of Parliament. She was universally recognized for her outstanding abilities, but it turns out she had a physical disability, because of which she couldn't speak. Adele learned about it only recently. A small talk ensued. The lady asked if she liked the tea. The girl admired the wonderful aroma of the drink. Lady Eva prepared to write something. She brought the pen to the paper several times, and after a while she took her graceful brush away, as if she wanted to ask about something, but she couldn't formulate the question. Finally, she wrote a compliment. The young lady was embarrassed. The new inscription said that such a beautiful girl must have pleased Cesare. Is the lady experiencing any discomfort here in the mansion? Adele shook her head. The elder brother took good care of his little sister. Madame raised an eyebrow and mockingly asked, how did this womanizer take care of the girl? The lady knew about the origin of the shoeshine girl from the Camorra slums. She assumed that there was a love affair between the young people. However, Adele denied it. Lady Eva tried to get her interlocutor to talk. After all, she was on her side. But she insisted that such a thing was impossible. Even the thought of such a thing was considered a crime. Dark honey-colored eyes with gray eyelashes looked intently into the large amber eyes of the interlocutor. Finally, the pen wrote the following. If Adele and her grandson Cesare were in love, the girl would be sent to another family. This situation would have caused talk in high society. In the eyes of others, such a family relationship would have looked like blasphemy. A graceful hand slowly wrote the following. That the girl did not need to go to the Della Valle family instead of her grandson. Lady Eva recognizes Adelaide Bonaparte and can give her much more than Cesare, a comfortable life in this house. Adele didn't understand what Madame really wanted, and she didn't want to send the girl to another family, and she didn't allow her to marry Della Valle's son. But the venerable lady smiled. She wished Cesare love. After all, he could not know happiness in childhood, and to this day nothing has changed. But if Lady Lucretia is around, it is possible, and the result of their great love will be beautiful children. Suddenly the door to the hall swung open, and Mr. Cesare walked in with a dazzling smile, incidentally catching Madame in her excessive curiosity. The young gentleman quickly took the notebook from the table and leafed through the notes. The smile disappeared from his chiseled face. The notebook was thrown back onto the table and fell with a soft thud. Apparently, Grandma was bored since she started such conversations. The young gentleman looked attentively at his dear madam and the young lady. Both looked very harmonious in this ceremonial hall. Then he turned to Lady Eve and their eyes met. For a moment they simply looked at each other. These two had the ability to speak without words. Then Cesare leaned towards his beloved grandmother and tenderly kissed her on the cheek. Love and respect shone through in every movement. He said out loud that he was glad to meet her. But he takes Lady Adele away from her. After all, he needs to visit somewhere. He took his sister by the hand. As he said goodbye, he wished Madame Eva to remain in good health and promised to see her soon. Madame President watched the couple leave. It did not escape her attention how Cesare tenderly squeezed the girl's hand. The young people walked down the corridor, still holding hands. The man asked what the answer was to Madame Eva's offer. The girl replied that she refused. Adele saw that they were going in the wrong direction. She told her companion about it, that the exit was in a completely different part of the corridor. However, Cesare smiled slyly. The young man had something of his own in mind. After all, he had said that they needed to visit one place. It turns out that this was not a simple excuse. The place where they are heading with the young master is every girl's dream. Adele sat in a carriage that was almost entirely covered in gold. She had never in her life imagined such a possibility. This quadriga of Bonaparte was even written about in the newspapers. That's how famous it was. A luxurious and expensive carriage, harnessed by 4 select horses. Saint-Nar was small in size and it was difficult to build wide roads there. Therefore, a carriage was considered a luxury. Only a prestigious family could afford it. They said that the blue star rushing through the streets of the city was like a hurricane, as if the whole country was shaking from the grandiose grandeur of the Bonaparte family. Suddenly the coachman drove onto an unfamiliar street. It was so majestic that it seemed unreal. It was Via Bella Stella. Adele pulled back the velvet curtain and gasped. A row of toy-like houses, shop windows, and signs. She had never been here. She didn't dare even approach this luxurious street, where every corner exuded wealth, to a place she could only look at from afar. But now the girl from the slums was here, in a luxurious carriage, and with the head of the Bonaparte family. The gentleman turned to his companion. It was noticeable that the girl looked very pleased. However, she was not smiling at all because it was the first time I was in such a place, and I was noticeably nervous. But I should have gotten used to it soon. Cesare was very pleased. The surprise effect had been achieved. Any beauty would have melted from such a surprise. He took a drag on his cigar and advised not to hide emotions if you really like something, but to enjoy life. For starters, you can just smile. Such a beautiful face should be decorated with a smile. But perhaps the beauty is burdened by the company of a known libertine, and such an escort is not quite to her liking. Or maybe any activity with the gentleman does not interest her. Cesare smoked a cigar and the smoke slightly hid his eyes. It was clear that he was waiting for answers to questions. Adele didn't understand this interest. After all, she was the younger sister. There were a lot of beauties around. Who dreamed of being at the feet of the master? It seemed she was trying not to show that Signor Cesare was very much attracted to a simple girl from the slums. But it turned out that the girl did not attract the gentleman. After all, he only got pleasure from playing with a simpleton. Finally, the wheels creaked. The clatter of hooves on the cobblestones died down. The coachman stopped the luxurious carriage. The young gentleman reported that they had arrived at their destination and reached for the gilded handle to open the door. Suddenly, Adele grabbed his hand with a sharp movement. She covered the man's hand with her fragile palms. Strong excitement was visible in her eyes. The handsome man raised an eyebrow, but the girl quickly found something to answer. That she wanted to open the door herself. She said that she was worried about the gentleman's injury. The wound had not yet healed. After all, the doctor had forbidden any sudden movements. It looked like flirting. But judging by the notes in Madame Eva's notebook, the sister denied such a possibility. The whole street was in motion. As soon as the blue star appeared on the horizon, the boutique owners ordered their assistants to arrange their goods better. After all, one visit to Mr. Cesare could provide a whole month's income. The question was in the air. What kind of girl did he bring this time? Finally, the carriage door swung open. The gentleman gallantly extended his hand, and an unknown lady with loose dark hair came down the steps. An elegant couple entered a nearby store. Its window was shining with precious stones and golden sparkles. The backlighting favorably demonstrated the goods. Of course, such a beauty needed exquisite jewelry to shine brighter than the stars. The owner of the shop, Bottego di Vizio, stood behind the counter. She exchanged traditional greetings with the young gentleman. Cesare, with a dazzling smile, announced that he had arrived with his younger sister to buy the lady the finest jewelry. However, those on display were not suitable. They looked plain. I asked to bring out the decorations that corresponded to the Bonaparte family name. The gentleman and his companion were presented with a ring with a 15-carat diamond, absolutely transparent, without a single defect. Next, a necklace of rubies with a special cut. They were mined in the Mogok region. The main element was blood red. And of course, a rare thing. A pendant made of precious emerald with a beautiful velvety structure. 9 carats. All pieces are the finest of jewels and selected according to the high standards of the Bottego di Vizio house. The hostess smiled sweetly and looked with curiosity at the young lady, carefully holding the expensive jewelry in her hand. Both Cesare and the shop owner saw that Adele was not very enthusiastic, as if she doubted something in her soul. Then the gentleman asked to bring something more suitable for the refined lady, his younger sister. The hostess leaned over the counter to find the right box. Her confused look spoke for itself. I wondered who the gentleman's sister really was. She was definitely an aristocrat. She exuded a special aura of luxury and nobility, and this special reaction to expensive jewelry. As if the lady did not want ostentatious luxury. We need to come up with something special for the picky lady. Suddenly, she pulled out elegant pearl earrings, not as valuable as the previous pieces, but pearls seemed to suit the lady perfectly. Cesare immediately beamed. Finally, he found what he needed, and he asked his sister to try on the jewelry. But the sister still hadn't got her ears pierced. The mistress was surprised. Usually, young ladies had their ears pierced in early childhood, so the mother was of strict morals. You could just put the earrings on your ears to see how they looked on Adelaide. They seemed to fit perfectly. The hostess noted the extraordinary aura around the beauty, but Mr. Cesare had already asked to pack the jewel. However, he noticed that none of the jewels had touched the girl's soul, no matter how exquisite or expensive they were. Adele said that there was one thing that attracted her very much, and she pointed her finger at the brooch on his uniform. Cesare was very surprised. After all, there was nothing special about this little thing. But this brooch suited the Duke very well, although the design was a bit simple. The girl didn't agree with this. The brooch exactly repeated the color of his eyes. Amber, the same as hers. It seemed like these two had spent their entire lives apart, and now they looked at each other as if they were afraid to look away. The shop owner could only guess. Could this man and woman have only family feelings for each other? If she were a man, she would never let such a girl go. A true beauty. Cesare stood thoughtfully. Sometimes he couldn't understand the logic of women. They scared him a little. The gentleman approached the owner of the jewelry store so that she could create some jewelry with a similar stone. The lady happily agreed to do everything in the best possible way. The customers said goodbye to the owner. It was time to move on to the next boutique, and then to the next, and so on ad infinitum. When they got into the carriage with numerous boxes and packages, it was already evening. The moonlight made Bella Stella Street look like a fairy tale. The young gentleman asked his companion if she didn't like jewelry. She smiled shyly. There were no women like her in the world. But then why doesn't sister look particularly pleased? Sighing slightly, the girl gave an answer. She won't be able to take them when it's time to leave the mansion. In essence, this was true. These numerous purchases were not made for the shoeshine girl, but for a project called Cesare's Little Sister. And you won't get a kiss of thanks from her for the cute little things you've bought, like other beauties did. Suddenly Adele perked up and asked to stop the carriage. Cesare immediately gave the order to the coachman. The girl saw one boutique, Secretum. Once in a past life she had seen it from afar. Cesare laughed. It was just a cheap shop. The lace he bought today was 3 times more expensive than anything he bought there. The sister looked sadly out the carriage window. Sighing, she only thanked her elder brother. The blue star was leaving the famous street. Only the bright lights of the carriage were still visible in the distance, gradually dissolving in the moonlight. The next morning in Adelaide's bedroom, the maid was helping the beauty do her hair. The master had spent a lot of money on yesterday's shopping, and this pleased Effie. Before this, the ward had to be dressed in the things that were in the mansion, and now the wonderful blue dress suited her so well. The outfit was personally chosen by her brother. The dress was slightly loose, light with an open back. It came with special shoes. The choice was now huge. The girl chose lemon-colored summer shoes with cute bows. They were so pleasing to the eye with their color, like juicy fruits. Sir Aguirre appeared in the doorway. He offered his help. As always, he was smart in his impeccably tailored uniform. The gentleman dropped to one knee, as if bowing, and with great care he helped the lady put the shoes on her feet. These shoes made of young buffalo skin were soft and comfortable. You could hardly feel them on your feet, but they looked just wonderful. Not like the shoes she learned to wear from Madame the etiquette teacher. Taking lessons in social walking from Madame Flavia was pure drudgery. Aguirre looked up sharply as if he was about to say something, but he didn't say anything. The girl did not miss this. She asked if there was any question. The young man shook his head. The maid came closer and said that classes were resuming today. They would be held in Aria's hall. Brashear volunteered to accompany the lady. After all, the hall was in the outer part of the mansion. A girl who was not very familiar with it. Adele raised her amber eyes. She wondered who her new mentor was. What kind of person was this man? At this point, Mr. Cesare entered the bedroom and announced that the next few classes would be dance lessons, and they will take place under his personal guidance. The teacher and partner will be the signor himself. Adele was embarrassed and politely thanked her brother. He laughed and asked him not to show his displeasure so obviously. Cesare extended his hand, as if inviting the lady to confide in him. The sister looked up hesitantly. His hand seemed to offer something more than an invitation to dance, and the lady placed her palm into the manly hand. Adele doubted that her brother needed to spend time and energy on her, but he immediately interrupted her. His injury was almost gone. There was nothing to worry about. The girl was still worried about that incident, when she fell from the roof right on the gentleman. After all, the young man was injured because of her. But Cesare was not without sin either. After all, once, in a fit of anger, he crushed her wounded foot with his boot. The girl couldn't help herself. You have to have humanity towards others. But the brother retorted, it doesn't work between a man and a woman. The couple entered a hall with a massive staircase. The space seemed to be filled with fresh air. There was a gramophone on an elegant table. Cesare wound the pen and placed the needle on the record. The room filled with pleasant light music. He slowly turned to the lady. He bowed gallantly and offered to dance with him, and he took a step forward. Then the gentleman bowed slightly and extended his hand as if expecting consent, inviting his partner to dance. The gentleman was very handsome, in a white cambric shirt with lace. His waist was tightly cinched with a wide belt. Politeness shone through in every gesture. Cesare leaned over slowly and kissed the lady's hand. Just a light touch of his lips on the delicate feminine hand. The first lesson has just been taught. The gentleman who delays in this is refused. The leading hand should be relaxed. The other one lies on the partner and not tense at all. The final position for the waltz involves a tight embrace, and Cesare pulled his sister towards him. His hand confidently held her slender waist. The partner started joking that such tight embraces are very exciting, and he might not be able to hold back. Let the lady be more careful. But the girl asked to be more serious. You can't act like a teenager in such a serious matter. Waltz is a sensual dance, like a conversation between two lovers. The gentleman should lead the dance, and the lady should just follow him. The beautiful couple was spinning in a waltz. It seemed like the world around them had stopped. Cesare praised his partner. She gave herself over to the dance. The man looked greedily at the girl in his arms, as if he wanted to swallow her whole, without a trace. With such behavior, he simply had to be sincere. There was no question of pretense. The space in the room seemed to heat up with raging passion, as if the sea around them was agitated. Cesare smiled smugly. After all, he was the best dancer in all of Fornati. The lady should not have equated the other partners with him, but he couldn't be capricious. If his sister said she wouldn't marry Ezra della Valle, it would be bad. Lady Adelaide's cheeks were flushed from dancing. She herself was simply beautiful at that moment. That dress suited her so well. The girl lowered her head and assured the gentleman that such a thing would not happen under any circumstances. The brother expressed doubt. After all, anything could be expected from people. But the girl asked not to worry about it. The partner suggested practicing some more. So far she was doing well, but she needed to consolidate her success. Suddenly the huge doors of the hall swung open. The couple was still waltzing. Madame Eva Buonaparte and Lady Lucretia appeared on the threshold. Those who entered greeted the maid and the brashier. They did not pay attention to the maid's surprised look, and they headed straight to the dancing couple. Only Lucretia let it slip that it was Madame President's decision. She suggested attending a dance lesson. Adele froze. After all, she remembered the recent conversation with Cesare's grandmother, and how she extolled Lucrezia. The brother seemed to understand the feelings that had overwhelmed the girl, and he ordered her not to be distracted, and to concentrate on the dance. The music took them into a magical world, and the couple began to whirl in a waltz again. Adele heard the ladies whispering among themselves that the girl was not particularly skilled in waltzing. In the place where the girl grew up, balls were held, although nothing was known about the dark past of this sister. Lucretia insisted that the lady would have a hard time fitting into high society with such poor skills. Madame Eva agreed. The balls at the Bonaparte house were always crowded. The lady would face enormous pressure. After all, girls in noble families got used to this from childhood, and she expressed hope that Lady Adelaide would not be too upset. All these words cut the heart like a sharp knife. At some point, the lady lost her balance and swayed, but strong hands caught her. Cesare stopped the circling. It was time to end this spectacle. The man pulled his sister along with him. Bowing to Madame Bonaparte, he asked if she was in good health. He did not expect to visit his grandson without warning, and with Lady Delaval, too. Slightly stumbling, the lady asked to call her without titles, just by her first name, as a good friend. Cesare ignored this. He only asked what the reason for this visit was, and he grinned slightly. Madame Sherman took her notepad and began to write. She was looking for a suitable lady to help Adelaide, to prepare for the debutante ball, and Lady Lucrezia kindly offered her candidacy. The grandmother wanted her grandson to discuss the matter with Lady Della Valle, but Cesare only snorted. This boy needed to be married urgently. Otherwise, he would continue to flutter like a butterfly from flower to flower. Madame looked at her grandson. She noticed that Lady Lucrezia was very skilled in dancing, and Cesare simply had to dance with her. And Adelaide would have watched it. After all, you could learn from example. That way you can learn the lesson even faster. Lucretia beamed. The lady had flattered her. But since she insisted, for the sake of the lesson, she was ready, and she quickly trotted to the master. After all, this was all for the sake of helping the sister of Master Cesare. A smile shone on her pinpoint wax face. For some reason, Adele now remembered the terrible words. Lady Lucretia had said them then, that she wanted the girl to be protected from the murderers. And it was the killer who pushed her off that roof. Of course, it could have been a simple coincidence. Cesare could not resist Madame Eva's will. He had to follow her wishes, and he asked Lucrezia to dance. The couple moved away to the center of the room, and Madame Eva and Adele remained standing to the side. The lady again inquired whether there was a love affair between her and Cesare. The girl flushed. Just a familial bond between brother and sister, and nothing more. Madam Chairwoman knew her grandson very well, but she could not understand. Why then did he care so much about the girl? At this time the new couple was waltzing. Adele watched the man and woman and their embrace carefully, but there was a chill in her amber eyes. The lady replied that she was the younger sister. That was the reason for the gentleman's concern. The dance ended. The audience applauded. Lucrezia grabbed Cesare's hand, as if her strength had suddenly left her. He grunted in displeasure. Madam Chairwoman was delighted. The couple looked great. All that was left was to set the wedding date. Lucrezia perked up. After all, she had dreamed about this for a long time, and she already considered herself Cesare's bride. Madame continued. This girl was the chairwoman's personal guest, and she expected her grandson to treat her well. Cesare began to say something indignantly, but the lady was already leaving the room. She trusted her beloved grandson. The young man, his sister, and the guest stared at each other. The silence dragged on. Finally, Cesare lit a cigar. He turned to Lucretia sarcastically. Did she have a good time? Having staged this whole spectacle. And it seemed that she tried too often to catch the gentleman's eye, attracting attention in any way available to a pretty lady. Lucretia blinked her eyes. After all, she was only worried about the master. She was not thinking about anything else. Cesare was adamant. He didn't need this attention. The lady insisted that she was trying to help. After all, the gentleman was going downhill. The man met the ladies calmly, and he didn't see anything reprehensible in it. But the lady hoped that one day he would wake up. Lucretia had overcome her shame and come here, seeing her master sinking into the depths of hell. But he could not understand this impulse. The girl's whole appearance spoke of sincerity. Innocence itself shone through in her youthful appearance. And finally, the confession was heard. She loves Cesare. Lucretia almost screamed. He loves now, and he will always love. Tears gushed from the woman's eyes. Even if the gentleman does not share these feelings, the lover would wait as long as necessary, even her whole life. Cesare answered in his own manner. There is no love without bed, so let her choose what she wants. It was pitiful to look at Lucretia. Tears were pouring from her eyes. A real hysteria began. The brother was completely indifferent to this. He turned to Adelaide and said that the lesson was over for today, and that the lady should return to her room. Suddenly, the desperate girl grabbed Adele's hand and screamed that Madame Eva wished for the young ladies to get along with each other. And the master could not contradict his grandmother, so his will meant nothing. Cesare froze, barely restraining himself. The crumpled cigar flew to the floor. The young gentleman walked quickly out of the hall, but his sister stopped him. If he had not objected, the lady wanted to dine with Lucretia. There was determination in their eyes. All three of them had something to discuss during the meal, to put everything in its place. Cesare sat at the head of the laid table. The girls found themselves opposite each other. The gentleman held a glass of red wine in his hand, and sat thoughtfully in his chair, looking at the ruby sparks in the crystal vessel. Lady Lucrezia was very animated. She asked Cesare why he had not touched the food. After all, everything was very tasty. Bonaparte's cooks were famous throughout the world. The young man smiled. He was sated watching Adelaide eat. His sister was behaving very well. The lessons had done her good. Lady Della Valle was embarrassed. She urgently needed to think of a way to attract Cesare's attention, to draw the gaze of those amber eyes to her side. But the gentleman still didn't take his eyes off his sister. He watched her enjoying the steak, cutting off small pieces of the juicy meat. At the end of the meal, she turned to her brother and asked permission to accompany Lady Lucretia, and she wanted to do it personally, without the owner's presence. He smiled. For the first time, the shoeshine girl asked for something. Cesare took a sip of wine. The corners of his lips lifted in a barely perceptible smile. Permission granted, as the lady wishes. He put the unfinished glass on the table, and quickly said goodbye to those present. The guest was discouraged by this, and the gentleman turned to Lucretia, and in a firm voice he said that he hoped never to meet the lady again, and he headed for the exit. He paused slightly at the door where the brashier stood. He gave orders to Sir Egir to accompany the lady, but to keep his distance. The assistant was also waiting at the door. He had been ordered to proceed upstairs. There were urgent matters. The secretary reported that there were problems with the construction of galleons. There were interruptions in the supply of materials for sailing ships. It seems that Queen Trevium has decided to put a spoke in the wheel. Cesare has given orders to find new suppliers. He didn't like everything that was happening. It was necessary to organize the process of building ships, so that the shipyard would work without interruptions. At this time, the ladies approached the main entrance to the mansion, and they had a leisurely social conversation. Lucretia was glad to meet him, and asked permission to pay another visit. Adelaide politely replied that only her brother could grant permission. The interlocutor tried to evade this. After all, a meeting between the young ladies would please both. But Adele was adamant. Only the master decides this. However, Lucrezia did not back down. After all, Madame Eva herself approved of these rendezvous. The opponent stated that the grandmother must respect the will of the head of the Buonaparte family. From the balcony, Cesare and his assistant watched what was happening. How Lucrezia insisted again and again on friendship between the girls. But his sister was as hard as a rock. Finally, Adelaide couldn't stand it any longer. She said that friendship was certainly possible. But the lady seemed to have another goal: to get the gentleman through his sister. Lucrezia pretended not to understand what was being said. She only wanted friendship with Cesare's sister. I just felt a little awkward, and I wanted the gentleman to facilitate this. Nothing more. However, Adele remembered what had happened, and she advised him to win his brother's heart, instead of trying to destroy his sister. The young men on the balcony burst into laughter. This girl had turned down the most famous schemer in high society. Miss continued that she most likely would not be able to get along with Cesare, even if her sister disappeared. It seemed that Lucrezia had never been refused in such a form. She was simply laughed at, taken for a fool. The lady had been harassing all the girls in Cesare's circle in turn, but now she had been exposed. And Adelaide Bonaparte put an end to the conversation, that she would be here as long as her brother wanted her, and the lady had no business showing her sharp teeth. Lucretia was furious. This impudent woman did not dare to open her mouth. How could she accuse Lady Perfection without any evidence? But Adele didn't want to get involved in the intricacies between her brother and his girls. She only stated that their relationship was familial, like brother and sister. However, Lady Lucretia observed the opposite at that time. But then a small incident almost happened, and the brother showed attention to his little sister. And if it weren't for that incident, there would be no reason to worry. The girl was just a younger sister who suddenly appeared. Cesare sat on the balcony with a cigar, and only added to himself that his sister would soon get married. Adele summed it up. Her brother was a great man, and he was going to marry Lucrezia soon. They were perfect for each other, and her sister could help with that a little. Sparks from his cigar fell down, and in them, as if the waltz continued to spin, men and women, 2 pairs of amber eyes. But then another image came to mind. Sharp scissors at his neck, and the look of an angry little beast from the slums, and a beauty lying on his bed with her hair disheveled, pressed down by an excited man sitting on top of her. Cesare felt so sad, as if cats were scratching at his soul, although there seemed to be no obvious reason. In the evening twilight, the carriage sped along the forest road. Lady Lucretia consulted with her maid that Lady Adelaide had promised her to arrange frequent meetings with Mr. Cesare. Was it possible that this was true? The companion in round glasses answered the lady that it was only an attempt to calm the girl down. But that look, the lady remembered it. Perhaps Adelaide really wasn't in love with her brother. Although Lucretia did not understand this, how was this possible? Her whole body was shaking from the mere presence of the master, and if she fell into his arms, her breathing stopped. Then the maid suggested showing her sister's true face to high society, but that would turn Cesare away from Lady Lucrezia. Now she only slightly irritated the gentleman, and that meant she could approach him carefully and unobtrusively. Although his heart was breaking with love, there was no need to rush. Moreover, Adelaide promised to facilitate the meetings. This means the girl would be able to see the object of her adoration much more often, and make up for the separation due to house arrest. The maid perked up. After all, if the plan was carried out, Adelaide would marry Ezra della Valle, following an old agreement. But the girl was not a noblewoman. Then young Master Ezra would have had to marry a simpleton. Lucretia just laughed. It was none of her business. Let her brother sort out his own affairs. The deception might not have been discovered. After all, Adelaide looked like a noble lady, so it was quite possible. But another problem arose. It was necessary to approach Cesare without contractual obligations. If the first method failed, it was necessary to urgently find another. Therefore, the maid had to strictly keep the secret. After all, if it is true that Cesare's sister is a person from the outside— Suddenly the lady stopped mid-sentence. Apparently some thought had occurred to her, and it was not worth dedicating the maid to it. An open envelope lay on the mahogany inlaid table. It was addressed to the younger sister, Adelaide Bonaparte. The gentleman wrote on a sheet of expensive paper that, unfortunately, he could no longer dance with his sister, at the insistence of the family doctor. The pen froze over the next line. The image and smile of the lady was a honey balm for the brother. To see her next to him is the greatest happiness given to a man. Signature César Bonaparte. Lady Adelaide read the letter. Her hands were shaking. The maid was instructed to find the same paper and ink. Effie laid the supplies on the table. She asked if she needed a sample response to this type of letter. The lady refused. After all, she had read Dante, and she could write a reply letter without any difficulty. She wrote the address in beautiful handwriting. Dear brother. And then she wrote that when she was with him, her soul almost rose to the stars. Thanked him for taking pity on a poor girl from the slums, and for showing so much mercy, kindness, and greatness. All virtues gathered in one worthy man, beautiful in his soul and body. The letter ended with the signature, Loving Sister Adelaide Bonaparte. The girl carefully put the letter into the envelope. The maid was surprised that the letter was written so quickly. Giving a worthy answer is a whole art. Adele was embarrassed. Perhaps it hadn't turned out so well. The maid assured her that it had been very dignified. She didn't even have to give any advice. The lady was thinking that now she would have a new teacher, since her brother would no longer be able to dance in a pair. Suddenly, Sir Aguirre spoke up. Now he would be her partner. This was not usually the duty of a marriage officer, but a lady might well have made use of a suitable candidate for the occasion. Adele was extremely surprised, and she asked Effie if Aguirre would really be her teacher and partner. After all, it didn't seem like he was into dancing. Rather, he was a real warrior. But the young man extended his hand, inviting the lady to dance, and she stepped forward, relying on him. The sir immediately kissed the lady's hand, said he would do his best, and the couple headed to the ballroom. Brashear reported the master's order, that the lady needed to practice her waltz some more. That's what they decided to start with. The gramophone played beautiful music again, and the couple circled as if they were flying. The maid watched the process very carefully. It was like another dance. Aguirre twirled the lady around himself and pulled her into his arms again, without letting go of her hand. Although he didn't hold himself too freely, even a little stiffly. But still, he was a good partner. At least her heart didn't jump out of her chest next to him. And the man didn't look at her with a predatory gaze. The lady remembered that at their first meeting the young man smelled rather strange. Blood and corpses. It was a foul smell of anxiety and despair, but familiar to every slum dweller from childhood. Suddenly a thought came to mind, that Cesare uses this man for special occasions, when he needs to clean up after himself in some little business. After all, Madame the etiquette teacher disappeared somehow unexpectedly. At that very moment, Sir Aguirre was assigned to the lady as an escort. Maybe to get rid of her too, when the right time came. It seems the escape from hell brought nothing. After all, it continued in this paradise too. The lady decided to clarify the situation. Perhaps she could find out something. She asked her partner if he was good with a sword. However, the sir did not support the conversation. After all, he had no right to discuss such things, since he is the lady's mate. But then the girl could trust the guard more, if she knew that he was a professional. The young man hesitated for a second, but he replied that he was good at it. The lady should not worry. But Adelaide only decided that Sir would provide something else. Grant a painless and quick death. Late in the evening in her bedroom, the lady gave instructions to her maid to make a change in tomorrow's schedule, to include a visit to the outer mansion. After all, high society people were often there, including my brother, and watching them will help you get closer to high society. Adele planned to stay out of sight. To be on the safe side, she wanted to take Aguirre with her. Effie didn't know what to do. After all, the ward had never asked for anything like this. She had to notify the gentleman about this. The mistress asked to carry out the order right now, and the maid left, leaving the girl alone. Suddenly the door to the room slammed. Lucretia entered, that stubborn woman, who demanded more than simple promises. To help with Cesare, the sister had to keep an eye on her brother. After all, her role here is clear, to keep the agreement regarding the marriage with Della Valle. In the end, Adele shouldn't have stopped Lucrezia. And if the agreement between them is revealed, Cesare will forgive his sister for the sake of fulfilling the plan. After all, her older brother was exactly that kind of person. generous and consistent. Effany entered the room and said that the gentleman had given permission. However, he asked not to miss classes, and he also said that a new dance teacher would be arriving soon. The lady had to be ready. Adele and the guard were standing on a hillock. From there was a beautiful view of the outer mansion, and one could calmly watch the owner. They were completely invisible from the shelter of the tree leaves. Aegir reported that the master was coming out. Cesare stood at the entrance and smoked a cigar. The man looked thoughtful, but as always magnificent. There were also several people heading towards the front entrance. The girl could hardly see, and she slightly stuck her head out from behind the tree. We managed to see the mayor, Lucy Gazzolo, and also the current prior and head of the Rossi clan, Livy Rossi. Also present was the former president of the Signoria, Elder Giannini. These were all important and influential people of Santnar. Cesare met the distinguished guests. He smiled affably. His assistant, as always, stood behind him. The men bowed politely, greeting the young gentleman. It was evident that they had deep respect for the head of the Bonaparte family. The lady leaned out even further. A branch crunched under her foot, and the spy jumped back behind the tree. Everyone turned around at the noise, but no one was visible in the shadows of the trees. The conversation continued. Adele was pleasantly surprised. It turned out that her brother's position was quite high, even higher than one could have expected. At one point, Cesare was so close that the lady forgot herself. Thoughts troubled her head. After all, she had to live up to such a brother. There was a gap between them. Aegir supported the girl, saying that there was nothing to worry about. After all, the master was now her family. Then the sister had no choice but to become better, to train day and night. A little ladybug crawled from a blade of grass onto her finger and spread its red wings. A second later it flew away, melted away like a ghost. It was time to return to the mansion and continue the dance rehearsal. The gentleman left the mansion. The assistant was already at the main entrance. Gigi leaned over and quietly said, in the direction of the distant trees he spotted Lady Adele, and apparently not alone. Cesare was very surprised. What was his sister doing there? Yes, he gave permission to visit the outer mansion. Maybe the girl was following him around like a dog. The owner didn't know what to do. The secretary suggested not paying attention to it. Most likely it was all for the sake of a deal with Lucretia. And now the sister was trying to find out the master's daily routine. Several days passed, and Cesare was still replaying that situation in his head. And this cunning rogue had attracted Sir Aegir to her plans. Just as I was thinking about it, the girl was right there. She showed up at her secret place in the bushes, a persistent young lady. She did not wish to interfere between her brother and Lady Lucretia. These worthy representatives of their families should be together. Cesare was perplexed. After all, his sister was clearly avoiding him. Yes, that was exactly what was intended. But the gentleman's male pride was hurt. Someone called out from behind. But the man seemed not to hear. He had never been rejected before. The shoeshine girl raised the bar higher than the sky. She also said that her brother and Lucretia were a wonderful couple, and they were perfect for each other. Behind them, they were almost shouting in her ear. The gentleman was still lost in his thoughts and did not react. Maybe the girl had problems with her eyesight or something else. Gigi shouted almost into Cesare's ear that he was blocking the passage, and behind them a crowd of honored guests had already gathered. Then the gentleman turned to his assistant and quickly gave the order. If Adelaide tried to find out the gentleman's daily routine, do not tell anything. Instead, tell her to come to her brother in person. The secretary was very surprised, but he only said that he would carry out the order. Cesare lay on the huge bed in his bedroom. The silk robe was open, and it exposed the beautiful muscular body of a man. The gentleman analyzed the maid's report, that the sister selflessly engaged in self-education. During the day she sought meetings with him, and in the evenings she studied diligently. Sir Aegir also reported that when the master left the lady's sight, she insisted on a dance lesson. She practiced the waltz with the young warrior. This dance was already excellent. Aegir's words especially struck a chord with Cesare, as he recalled the waltz in which he had twirled his sister in the ballroom. It seemed then that they barely touched the ground, and the embrace was so tight that it was impossible to even take a breath. But the most important thing he remembered now were the eyes opposite. Those amber sparks were like a reflection of his eyes, or even his soul. Perhaps the lady was lying when she said she was not interested in the gentleman, and the deal with Lucretia was just a sham. The sounds of the waltz were still playing in his head. His fingers were beating the time. The young man became curious. How much more skillful the lady had become in dancing this dance. In the office, the secretary reported on the current state of affairs. He presented a financial report. On the situation with Trevium, he reported the following: that the answer had not yet been received. The gentleman raised an eyebrow and thought. Someone had decided that he was allowed to rule the sea. Who is that impudent fellow who dared to take away a piece of bread from the Bonaparte family? Thoughts were ahead of each other. Suddenly the secretary said that the lady was really interested in the gentleman's schedule. But he said nothing. He recommended that I contact my brother personally, for security reasons. Cesare smiled. The fish took the bait. He wondered if the lady would come first. If she was so open about her dislike, the brother could offer to have dinner with her. Cesare drummed his hand on the table. Suddenly the office door swung open. Lady Adelaide stood on the threshold, in person. Throwing aside the papers, the assistant rushed forward. But the gentleman intercepted him. He only greeted him dryly with the name of the goddess. He asked what had brought his sister to him, and without prior notice. It was obvious that the girl was very nervous. Her fingers were tightly clasped, and her amber eyes looked from under her brows. Finally, she plucked up her courage and said, "I hope the gentleman will have time to see her tomorrow." After all, a younger sister would sometimes like to spend her free time with her brother, to discuss everyday matters, or just have lunch together. It was a poorly disguised lie. Cesare smirked. He wondered what else this girl would say. After all, she clearly wanted to arrange a meeting between him and Lucrezia, but the sister said that she wanted to observe noble people from a secret place, in order to improve the skills that are so necessary for a lady. Brother did not hide his joy. He knew one suitable place, and he appointed a meeting today at midnight. Adele was shaking with fear and embarrassment. It was an excessive request, and it forced the master to devote time to the stupid whims of a girl. However, other questions immediately began to arise. What if Lucretia couldn't make it to the meeting at such a time? She asked in a breaking voice. Where should they go? So that her brother could tell her more in detail. However, the gentleman did not reveal the secret place. He did not say anything at all. Otherwise, it would not be interesting. There would be no surprise. The night lights illuminated the famous carriage of Bonaparte. It was harnessed by 4 select horses. The gentleman and his assistant stood at the front entrance. Cesare was slightly hesitant about his decision, but his assistant did not dare to dissuade him. Although the younger sister grew up in the Camorra slums, she dressed up as a boy. Therefore, in some ways, she was quite naive. Adele came out of the front door. Her outfit was black, a long closed dress with bare shoulders. The lady called out to her brother in a low voice. She was tormented by uncertainty. She wondered where they were going. He didn't become too frank. He only said that he was going to a good place, and asked not to ask unnecessary questions. The girl froze. Perhaps this was the moment, and the gentleman was going to sell his sister. Cesare smiled. He was already beginning to doubt that the girl was from Timor, and not some wax doll without feelings. Still, she sometimes showed resentment. Like all other people, even if her brother had taken her to be sold, it wouldn't have changed anything. In this case, it didn't make much difference. To be sold to Ezra della Valle, or to some other place. Adele couldn't believe such cruel but true words. She didn't think that this moment would come so soon. But the gentleman reassured the girl. Today they would see the seamy side of high society, its dark side, through the looking glass. At the same time, it became possible to evaluate the preparation of the young lady. How much closer the younger sister came to the image of a lady. The gentleman had a black mask in his hands. He handed a similar one to his companion. The mask had to be held with the lips by a special clamp. The brother didn't stand on ceremony. He inserted the protruding part into the dumbfounded girl's mouth and ordered her to hold it tightly, so as not to lose it. The Blue Star entered Delicia Street. At such a late hour, the roadway was deserted. Only streetlights illuminated everything around. Suddenly, the passengers noticed some movement. Many masked people were standing near a building. It turned out to be Galeotto's club. Adele didn't understand where they had ended up, but the gentleman had already opened the carriage door, and he gave the lady his hand, helping her out. At the entrance, a madam in a red dress and with a fan was waiting for them. She also had a mask on her face. Cesare handed them a piece of paper, and they were invited inside. The sister leaned towards the gentleman's ear and quietly asked what kind of place this was. Perhaps a closed club. The butler in a bowler hat and a bird mask greeted the visitors. He addressed Mr. Cesare. He was glad that he visited the club after a very long time. After all, the owner of the establishment needed to be there more often, so to speak, to personally control the process. The greeter noticed with surprise that the gentleman's companion had chosen a special Moretta mask. An involuntary exclamation escaped his lips. With a bow, he opened the door, letting the guests in. This night promised to be long. Afterwards, a special wish was given to the honored visitors. Have a sweet time. A long staircase descended into the basement. Finally, they found themselves in a strange hall. The dim light picked out some people. Lust and debauchery reigned in the hall. Ladies pressed themselves against men. Gentlemen gave free rein to their hands. Ladies kissed gentlemen. Everyone wore masks of different colors and shapes. Adele was amazed by what she saw, but she couldn't say a word. After all, the strange mask didn't allow her to do so. Suddenly, a whisper flew through the crowd of excited visitors. Moretta had arrived. Excited sighs were heard from all sides. The lady pressed herself against Cesare. Greedy glances flashed around her through the slits of various masks, and they were all directed at Adele. The girl was at a loss. She couldn't understand what this Moretta meant, the one everyone was talking about. Cesare freed his hand from his sister's embrace and walked away quickly. The young nymph was left alone, as if on the stage of some theater of the absurd. The lady in the jester's mask behind the bar screamed that the gentleman had chosen to vacate the place, and laughed throatily. Anxiety was brewing in the large amber eyes. These strange words. After all, the young lady was now completely alone, and all around were only lustful glances. The jester's mask slowly approached Adele. In her hands was a tray with drinks. She decided to enlighten the innocent creature about Moret's symbolism. Whatever happened to the owner of the mask, he had to remain silent, agreeing with everything, as if saying that he was thirsty for desecration. Someone's hand touched the back of the unwitting victim. Someone grabbed her arm. Others stroked her thighs. And a carousel of masks, looks, and debauchery circled around Moret's mask, as if some terrible dream was being dreamed in reality. Some held the girl's hands, not allowing her to resist, and some felt her breasts and waist. Others simply watched and enjoyed. Cesare watched from the balcony. The lady standing nearby offered to stop this action, if the master wished, but the gentleman was eager for a continuation, and he did not give his permission. Waiting for the action to continue, the floor of the hall was made up of black and white squares. The light was unevenly illuminating the center of the hall. It was as if a crazy chess game was being played. The masks already looked like shards of broken glass that shimmered in the flashes of light around the poor girl. Some greedy hands climbed under her skirt and stroked her slender legs in silk stockings. The men became more and more excited. The thirst for possession of the young body shone through in their greedy eyes. Lustful laughter was heard. The young gentleman seemed to be in the midst of a whirlpool of hands and eyes. The scene excited him to the limit. After all, just recently this girl was in his arms. Suddenly, someone approached the gentleman from behind. On the balcony was a man in a bird mask with a large beak. The bird gently touched the man's shoulder with its beak, as if it were a kiss. Cesare abruptly hit the impudent bird's beak with his hand. The man recoiled, and the owner got really angry, and he threatened the bird mask into leaving him alone. In a vicious circle, red glare illuminated the girl sitting on the floor. Someone's hands were squeezing her wrists, not allowing her to resist. Her back and legs were exposed. There was a cruel and cynical world in high society too. All men are the same, and if you don't see the simple truth, you'll fall from heaven to earth. The gentleman stood on the balcony clutching the railing, like an evil black angel, and looked down on the victim, forcing him to admit it. Let her either cry meekly or try to run away, or beg him to stop this crazy game. All this terrible time the girl's back was taut as a string. Alien vile hands were groping her body. The masks were spinning in some kind of wild dance. Cesare still stood on the balcony, and only watched as the girl in the center of the chessboard trembled, as if she was suffering from a strong chill. Suddenly she turned her head towards the gentleman. Their eyes met. It was as if lightning had struck the young man in the very heart. The girl was shaking like an aspen leaf, but she did absolutely nothing. She didn't beg for help, like a spineless doll. She could have taken advantage of it and thrown herself at them, like when the gentleman, mad with passion, threw her onto his bed. After all, that time the gentleman almost ended up with his throat cut, and now she trusted him completely. Cesare couldn't figure out this girl again. Suddenly the owner loudly said that it was time for the lady to leave. This was a signal for everyone. No one would dare to disobey and violate it, especially looking at the one who said these words. The chessboard was suddenly empty. Only a lone figure in a black dress sat limply in the center. The rest had cleared out. The gentleman left his balcony and began to descend the stairs into the hall. His words cut sharper than a razor. Sister wanted to see what high society was like. Now she saw it all, the very essence of it. The gentleman asked, almost clenching his teeth. Did he like what he saw? Was his curiosity satisfied? The woman's lips parted, and the mask fell down with a crash. The sound of the fall sounded like a gunshot. Tears fell on the lying mask, a stream of tears. But the girl remained silent and did not utter a word. She just raised her huge amber eyes full of tears. For a few seconds she looked as if into the very soul, and then she lowered her head again. Cesare was dumbfounded. The young lady had not been upset when she had fallen from the roof, not even when she had held a knife to his throat. She had been floundering on the bed, crushed by his weight. The woman hadn't shed a tear during the performance. Now she was sobbing like a child. Was it really worth throwing a tantrum over? The woman's back was hunched. There was no strength to maintain her posture. It felt like she was about to faint. Finally, the lady found the strength to rise and slowly walked away. Only the black mask remained lying on the chessboard floor. Sir Aegir was waiting at the exit, and he escorted the lady to the carriage. His face and his whole appearance expressed deep concern. The owner remained standing in the middle of the hall. The lady did not even deign to look at him, let alone say a word. He was in a bad mood. A whirlwind of thoughts swirled in the girl's head. It turned out that the gentleman had known about everything for a long time, and the fact that his younger sister was watching him, and everything else. Maybe he was warning her that way, that he could cast into hell with just a snap of his fingers, if the lady was too arrogant. At the very climax, Adele was about to grab the bottle and kill those vile boors. But Cesare's words about a certain exam that came to mind stopped her. Did the lady correspond to the image of a socialite? Then the young victim decided to endure until the end. After all, if she remained a lady, maybe someone would save the girl. Like a silly girl, I forgot myself for a moment, and I was immersed in the illusions of a wonderful, rich life. How could I be so naive? But the gentleman went too far. After all, he could only have scared her a little. The girl would have immediately remembered her place as a shoe shiner. Sir Aegir looked at his ward with sympathy. The elder brother had treated her very cruelly, but the subordinate could not contradict his master. He ordered the brother to stay close to his sister, and if anything happened, to be ready at any moment. Aegir leaned towards the girl, and confidentially told her that he would not allow anything bad to happen. For the first time in that long evening, Adele smiled. It was good to have such a devoted man nearby. But how calculating was Mr. Bonaparte? His plans were not given to be revealed to anyone, especially not to a simple girl from the slums. The young lady began to cry again. The hand of her faithful guard extended to the lady a white cambric handkerchief. The girl wiped away her tears. The fabric had a mind-blowing masculine scent. The owner was a real man, sensual and devoted. Sir Aegir said that there was no need to return the handkerchief. Let the lady use it as much as she needed. And Adele smiled again, this time more openly. The man extended his hand to the lady, inviting her to return to the carriage. A weightless piece of cambric slowly descended onto the cobbled street. Sir Aegir led the girl, holding her hand tightly. The young people walked at a leisurely pace. Signor Cesare was waiting for them near the carriage. Coming closer, the girl stopped hesitantly and expressed regret that she could not demonstrate the image of a true lady. The gentleman cynically stung his sister, that she was upset that he couldn't invite Lucrezia. After all, the plan was to arrange her meeting with Cesare. Adele was dumbfounded. After all, her brother knew all her plans. Not a single nuance had escaped notice from the very beginning. The girl was ready to humbly bear any punishment, if the master wished it. But the man only smoked his cigar. He seemed to ponder his younger sister's words for a while, but he said nothing. He turned sharply and walked away from the carriage. His shoes clattered loudly on the pavement. A small boy ran in the light of the setting sun. It ran faster than the wind. The color of his amber eyes merged with the sunset light. The child tried to catch up with the departing carriage, but the child's strength was not enough, and the carriage was already out of reach. The boy ran with all his might, but suddenly he tripped and fell to the ground. His hands ended up right in the road dust. Tears were streaming from her amber eyes. The child's heart was breaking into pieces, and a cry of despair was frozen on her lips. A middle-aged woman with a lush hairdo approached the child and sat down next to him. She lifted the child's head and looked into his eyes. She whispered in a voice full of love that everyone should be able to let go. Her voice was blurring, becoming duller. Cesare opened his eyes. He was lying on his bed in the family mansion. He had the same dream again. Again and again the gentleman saw this dream. Over time it began to seem that all this was not true, some kind of play of imagination. The Bonaparte mansion lived its own life. In the young gentleman's office, the secretary read out his daily schedule. First, a meeting was planned with the head of the Woolens, Arte, and in the afternoon a formal dinner with his sister, Lady Adelaide. Cesare was surprised. After all, he knew that there had to be another business meeting, but the assistant reminded him that the gentleman himself insisted on the replacement. He suggested canceling what had been planned earlier. After all, he had heard that the lady had cried a lot yesterday. But the owner did not understand what was so important about women's tears. The assistant agreed with this, although there was a certain understatement in his voice, as if he knew something else. Cesare asked to clarify the position. Gigi said that he himself was a native of the Camorra slums, and he sympathized very much with the lady. The gentleman could not even imagine what kind of place it was, and how miserable people could be there, who had no family and no home. All the sins of the world are collected in that place, and whoever gave in to weakness in those slums was the first to die. The owner was slowly boiling. After all, there were no slums here, but a life full of wealth and luxury. But the assistant only added that this difference is what makes it sad. Some people are given everything from childhood, and some were forced to fight for every crumb of bread. And the young man was never freed from the shackles of that place. Even in that shining place he could not find happiness. Adele thought the same. Every minute of being here, the slums never let a person go completely. Cesare thought about it. Never before had Gigi Manfredi shown sympathy to anyone, so the gentleman had behaved disgustingly. I thought what a terrible place this Camorra slum was, and asked to leave the dinner plans unchanged. He also gave instructions to invite Lucretia, on behalf of Adelaide, and to clarify that the gentleman would also be present. Just thinking about it made his appetite disappear. Cesare grimaced as if he had swallowed a lemon, so the younger sister agreed to the deal with Lucretia, only because she was trying to survive. So it was necessary to facilitate this. Adelaide needed to break into society. A friend like Lady Delaval would help her with that. Thus it will be easier to take one's place in the company of ladies. How these social games bored Cesare. The assistant reported that Lady Lucretia had arrived for dinner. The ladies were already waiting. The young gentleman entered the dining room. The long table was still set. The ladies took their places on either side. The gentleman had the place of honor at the head of the table. Both girls turned their heads as soon as Cesare entered, and each greeted the gentleman. Lucrezia was very animated and smiling. Adele was just paying a courtesy tribute. She asked if the gentleman had slept well. Cesare looked only at his sister. Her eyes were inflamed. It turned out that she really had cried all night. Lucretia decided to attract the gentleman's attention. She said that the ceremony of Lady Adelaide's initiation was just being discussed. After all, it all took place yesterday. All ladies must go through such a ceremony before making their debut in high society. Adele sighed with relief and quietly whispered that now everything fell into place. Thanks to her brother, the ceremony was safe. Looking back, it was a good experience. Cesare, however, muttered that there were a lot of tears for such a statement. The girl was embarrassed. Probably her provincial experience did not allow her to correctly assess what had happened. She asked the gentleman to forgive her for this. Cesare looked at Adele in surprise. She looked lively. Her cheeks were pink. There was no trace of sadness left. Lucretia offered to help Adelaide in this important matter, to prepare for the upcoming debut. Cesare agreed. He suggested that they meet more often at the mansion, until the event itself. Adele smiled. She was so grateful to her brother and her new friend. Lucretia could teach her a lot. Lady Delaval enthusiastically agreed. After all, it was for such occasions that friends were needed. To gather and talk like this, it was such a joy for a lady. It seemed that a wonderful friendship was beginning between the girls. The young ladies were already chatting among themselves. They even laughed a few times. The red wine helped to relax a little. Cesare stared blankly into his empty glass. Everything was going as planned. He was brought out of this state by the clink of cutlery. Adele put down her fork and knife. An untouched steak with blood remained on the plate. The dinner was over. In the setting sun, the mansion looked like a fairy tale. A young man accompanied by two ladies were strolling after dinner. Lady Lucretia chattered incessantly. She was grateful for the invitation to dinner. She asked Lady Adelaide not to worry. Her place as the darling of high society was assured. The gentleman looked at the guest carefully. He had to make sure that everything would be like this. After all, that was the first part of the plan. Cesare leaned towards Lucrezia and whispered something into her ear. At the end, he added louder so that she would go and be careful. The girl froze, not believing her happiness. Her beloved asked for something. Of course, the girl promised to take care of everything. Help his younger sister at the upcoming banquet for the master's birthday. Will do his best for this. Della Valle's carriage was leaving the Bonaparte estate. The brother and sister watched the carriage go. Both remained silent. Each was thinking about his own thing at that moment. Finally, Adele thanked her older brother for inviting her new friend to dinner. She had just wanted to talk to her. Cesare didn't answer. He just gritted his teeth. Then he turned to leave. But he came back right away. He tried to clarify the situation. He didn't understand why his sister behaved like that. Like a convenient wax doll for everyone. But the girl only smiled slightly. She wanted the gentleman to point out the shortcomings. Then she could correct her behavior. Adapt to the situation. Cesare was losing his patience. His sister was acting as if nothing had happened yesterday. It seemed that there was no point in crying over something like that. It would have been better if the girl had been angry, or upset like last night, and not acted like a pathetic little sister. The master's fists clenched in helplessness before this girl. But she only smiled meekly, and she asked for forgiveness. For overreacting yesterday. She promised to correct every little thing in her behavior that did not suit the gentleman. From now on, I must make every effort, and try even harder, to live up to my brother's expectations. If the master had given the order, the sister would have carried it out. Cesare grinned. After all, he could have forced her to go to bed with him. But this stubborn woman agreed to this too. If the master had ordered, she would have gone to bed with him. The man had already begun to imagine the corresponding scenes. Suddenly, Cesare felt as if he had been struck by electricity. An obvious thought flashed through his mind. Adele would tie herself to Ezra della Valle. After all, his brother himself wanted it. A shoeshine girl with scissors at his neck. A beauty in a crowd of insatiable, lustful people. This girl will be with della Valle. In his entire life, no woman had ever tormented his soul like that. As if she was tearing it into small pieces. The head of the Bonaparte family simply did not know what to do. Lady Adelaide was also not used to such experiences. In Camorra, everything was simple. Live or die. Sir Agur approached his ward. Her sad look alarmed the young man. He asked if everything was all right. The lady assured me that everything was fine. Nothing new had happened. Although, of course, it wasn't so. Suddenly, the lady suggested practicing the waltz. After all, there wasn't much time left. The gentleman accepted the invitation. Just like last time, the music picked up the twirling couple and easily carried them away to the fairy tale land of waltz, where women delight men, where gentlemen enjoy the beauty of their partners, and they rely on courageous companions. All the windows of the Bonaparte mansion were ablaze with bright lights. A line of carriages had gathered on the driveway. The procession barely moved. It seemed that this time more guests were expected than at last year's celebration. Everyone had come because of the rumors about the new debutante. Everyone wanted to greet Lady Adelaide Bonaparte. The high society was perplexed. The gentleman had never had a younger sister all his life. But suddenly she surfaced, only when the conversation turned to the engagement with della Valle's daughter. But rumors were circulating that the gentleman had spent more than 5 million gold coins on Bella Stella Street, all on purchases for one girl. Would he have behaved like that if it hadn't been a relative? That was the only talk going around the entire street of fashionable shops. In addition, Lady Lucretia had become a frequent guest at the mansion lately. Everyone was at a loss as to what was going on behind the closed doors of the noble estate. It was today that everything was supposed to become clear, and high society would be able to accept or reject Lady Adelaide Bonaparte. The ballroom was bustling with activity. Many noble houses were represented by their ladies and gentlemen. Someone called out to the red-haired beauty. It was Lady Genevieve of House Orcaine. The interlocutor was trying to find Lady Lucretia. After all, the red-haired girl was her best friend. Lady della Valle had disappeared somewhere, and was behaving strangely. She had forbidden Genevieve to ride in the carriage together. She had insisted on their separate arrivals. The master of ceremonies, in an impeccable suit, announced to all those present that the host of the reception, Mr. Cesare Bonaparte, had arrived. A wave of sighs and whispers swept through the ranks of those present. Everyone turned their heads looking for the young master. The ladies whispered breathlessly that the gentleman was magnificent, as always, and especially stunning were his thighs and his white uniform trousers. Probably the gentleman was planning to go on a night out. Tonight, right after the ball. From the balcony, the host addressed the distinguished public. He greeted members of parliament, officials, noble ladies and gentlemen. He expressed gratitude for the honor of his birthday reception with their presence. However, today's banquet was different from the previous ones, because he was not the only one present as a representative of Bonaparte. And the gentleman got to the main point. The audience held its breath. One lady even screamed in anticipation. Cesare continued. Probably everyone had already heard about the gentleman's younger sister. And taking advantage of the opportunity, the signor decided to introduce Lady Adelaide. The brother raised his hand in an inviting gesture and invited his sister, who had come from afar, to enter. Adele stepped onto the balcony with timid little steps. Her neat black high-heeled shoes stepped in complete silence. The lady appeared on the small balcony, as if the messenger of the sea goddess herself had emerged from the foam of the waves. The black velvet dress was embroidered with gold. The shoulders were bare, and on the gold belt a blue star shone as a sign of belonging to Bonaparte. The lady came down and gracefully settled herself on an elegant sofa. Those present in the hall froze. No one dared to ask the first question. Finally, the young man in the tie asked if the lady had really come from Capallo. The lady was surprised that the gentleman knew about this place. But the young man cleared up the situation. A distant relative had a villa in Capallo, and if he knew about such a charming lady, he would have asked for a meeting long ago. With a slight smile, the lady replied that 3 months ago she was an ordinary village girl, and would not have interested the gentleman. The young gentleman did not believe it. How could the lady pretend to be a country bumpkin with such elegance? After all, you can't hide an awl in a sack. Adele laughed. The gentleman was flattering her, but he bowed and kissed the lady's hand. Every word was true. The young man dared to ask the lady to dance with him at the ball, and she accepted the invitation. The admiring glances of all the young people were riveted on this couple. More precisely, on the girl who amazed everyone with her beauty. Each of them dreamed of dancing with the lady at least once. Genevieve, who was standing nearby, noticed that the lady was frighteningly beautiful. The reaction of the young men was not surprising. The red-haired girl wanted to talk to the lady, but the crowd of men was very dense. By the time the lady squeezed through, it was too late. Lucrezia stood next to Adelaide. She saw her friend, and hastened to introduce her to Lady Bonaparte. It was not for nothing that Genevieve had been watching Cesare's sister and following her everywhere. Now all of this came in handy. Adelaide introduced herself and smiled. The girl also introduced herself as Genevieve Malatesta, and she noticed that the lady was even more beautiful up close. Adele invited the red-haired lady to sit on the sofa next to her, to continue the conversation, but Lucretia got ahead of her, pointing to a place further away, next to her chair. In social circles, the seat next to a high-ranking person was the last to be occupied. Lucretia sat down on the chair and placed herself below Adele. The young men commented on Genevieve's antics, saying that a cuckoo had dropped her egg into their nest. The gentlemen turned to Adelaide. They asked if the lady had ever seen an insatiable cuckoo. Genevieve stood between the interlocutors as if in the middle of a duel. Adele retorted that she had seen an eagle hunting. They are quite clumsy in the sky, and when they are on the ground they flap their wings, driving away competitors. Then she looked straight at the red-haired girl and said that she loved canaries. The color of their bright feathers was similar to Genevieve's hair, and she politely asked the young people to leave. After all, it is unacceptable to impose one's views in this way, and they went too far. The gentlemen were embarrassed, having received a worthy rebuff, and they began to babble that they had been joking. That social joke was not aimed at Lady Genevieve. Adelaide put an end to this. Their jokes are absolutely not funny, and she will not allow the lady to be treated as a shallow, empty shell.